And Mayor Bass did send a letter to all of us on the board last night, reaffirming her commitment to addressing the payment model and getting funding to the providers that they need. If we name a problem, we can solve it, and that's what we're here to do today. First, we will hear from our director of the county's homeless initiative, Cherie Todoroff. Then we'll hear from LASA's CEO, Dr. Adams Kellum. Then our region's largest homeless service providers will speak, and our provider's perspective is essential to understanding the scope of this issue. With us today, and with great gratitude on my part, I want to welcome John Masseri, CEO of the People Concern, Kimberly Roberts, Chief Program Officer, LA Family Housing, Jennifer Hart-Dietz, CEO of PATH, Veronica Lewis, Director of HOPIX, Herb Hatanaka, Executive Director of
in the contract and execute those contracts before the start of the fiscal year. We also are very supportive of frequent invoicing by LASA. It had initially years ago been quarterly, it moved to monthly, it's now bi-monthly, and we've extended the opportunity to LASA to invoice us weekly as well in order to support that reimbursement. We hold ourselves accountable for the timely processing of invoices that we do receive. It is a priority for me in my office to pay those in a very timely way. We've put even more emphasis on that in recent weeks and are seeking to expedite all payments, and a number of those have gotten down to a matter of days at this point in terms of paying invoices. However, one of the most important things that we have done, also with your board support and also reflected in the funding recommendations that you approved, are a range of other types of services, including all of the case management services. We've already had done rate increases as it relates to our outreach workers. So we are seeking to address that gap between reimbursement rate and costs. However, we are still dealing with challenges. We will hear about them today from LASA. We will hear about them from our service providers. And we are committed to working with all of them on alternative payment methodologies in order to address those challenges. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Adams Kellum, welcome.
Thank you so much. Good morning, supervisors. Dr. Adams Kellum, LASA CEO. Thank you for inviting me here today. My presentation will show how our current payment model of cost reimbursement is a huge part of the crisis we're facing now. I've inherited many problems coming in as the new CEO of LASA, and I'm working hard to fix them. You've heard a lot of promises over the years, and I know you're frustrated. This moment must be about action. And I promise to be about action. Going forward, I will be communicating directly with you on urgent matters and issues of this nature. And if the board allows me, I would be happy to come back every 30 to 60 days to report back to you. Next slide. My first slide sets the stage for this conversation. We're sharing this information to be clear on how LASA is funded. We want to make sure that all know that the vast majority of our revenue is cost reimbursement, and to show that we work with very small overhead rates. As you can see, our total sources are $850 million, 85% cost reimbursement, 5% admin rate, 123.3 million operating fund, which is made up of 43.7 million administrative and 79.6 million direct program. LASA does not start the fiscal year with this revenue. Instead, we must submit invoices to funders to receive the money we need to reimburse providers for expenses they incurred an average of 3 or 4 months before. Next slide. While we're here to discuss challenges, I want to point out that Measure H funds have effective oversight provided by all of you, CEO HI, including my colleague Sri Tordoff and the Citizens Oversight Advisory Board. Measure H is the single largest source of funding within the county's homeless response system. And I thank you, supervisors, for working to provide this vital source of funding. There are lessons that we can take from how Measure H operates that can help us solve this crisis. Sri Tordoff went over many of the aspects of this operation and funding process that are effective. One is that LASA is able to invoice twice a month to ensure timely and efficient provider payments. And the willingness to allow us to invoice weekly has been profoundly helpful. I'll address other solutions to the crisis we're in later in this presentation. Next slide. In terms of LASA's financial position, as I said, about 85% of our budget comes to us through a reimbursement model, meaning we don't get the money until we invoice the appropriate funder. After the providers invoice us, and we verified and approved their submission. Similarly, about 85% of our budget goes out to service providers, as you saw on my first slide. As soon as we receive cash from our funders, we transfer it to providers. Normally, we pay providers within 1 to 3 days of receiving payment from our funders. Next slide. This is LASA's current cash balance as of May 21st, today, 2024. Next slide. As you can see here, while LASA collects millions each month from funders, the vast majority of these funds are paid to providers to reimburse them for services. LASA's month-end cash on hand is a fraction of the funding passed through to providers. As a result, when providers experience acute cash crunches, LASA has limited cash on hand to quickly reimburse them. Next slide. As of last Friday, LASA owes providers $60 million. Of that amount, approximately $48 million has been owed for more than 30 days. LASA typically reviews and approves invoices for payment and packages them in cash requests to funders within 2 weeks of receipt of invoices. As stated before, LASA typically pays providers within 1 to 3 days of receiving funder payments. Next slide. As you requested, this is our payables by funding source. Most of our funding comes from the city and county, and therefore the bulk of what we owe providers is due from the city and county. We know that under the cost reimbursement model, it takes 45 to 60 days from when a provider invoice is submitted for LASA to receive funding and pay providers. Please note that the $43.4 million figure for the city is outdated. Since May 17th, LASA has received $17.2 million from the city of Los Angeles, reducing the city amount to $26.2. Next slide. In addition to contract execution timing, which I mentioned earlier, some internal systems at LASA have definitely contributed to delays. This is especially an issue in our grant management system, which prevents invoices often from being submitted while a contract is in the amendment or budget modification process. LASA currently has 14 contract amendments that have impacted the payment timeliness for 6 providers. The chart here highlights the providers that are impacted and their status. We're addressing this in 3 ways. We've had to override that part of the system that blocks payments to get providers paid. We're working to reduce the number of amendments and budget modifications, which for a long time have been identified as extra red tape and bureaucratic steps that are unnecessary. We're updating the system itself so providers can continue to submit invoices even while they have amendments in process. A budget redirection in the past caused a pause to this process, as I said. The new enhancements to the budget modification process do not bring things to a halt. This is a big fix. Next slide. Due to the fact that even on-time invoice payments can still take 30+ days to process, advances are used to cover costs. Prepayments on contracts reduce the need for organizations to hold large cash balances or incur interest expenses to borrow. We need to expand and increase cash advances as a meaningful response to the liquidity challenges facing LA homeless service providers. LASHA received an advance of $82 million in Measure H working capital in FY 2017-2018. $50 million went out the door to providers as working capital. This left $32 million for annual advances. But the current rate does not cover the full expenses of providers, so they sometimes use the advances to offset this. Due to $8.6 million in advances that are pending repayment from previous years, LASHA started the current year with approximately $23 million to provide as advances. We put out about $19 million in advances this year, leaving nearly $4 million for LASHA to hold as working capital, which we expended in the first quarters of this fiscal year. Providers have started billing more because advances are not covering all of their increasing costs. Using a slightly different approach, the City of Los Angeles provides 25% annually for yearly contracts, but this cannot be paid out until all the contracting process is completed, which sometimes happens well after the work has already begun. Next slide. In terms of what's due from funders, the total that has been requested from funders is $77.2 million. It's important to note that between November 2023 and April 2024, 24% of funding requested was delayed. $76 million of the current category represents costs that were paid by providers up to 60 days ago. Please note that providers invoice on the 15th of the month prior. LASHA submits most invoices and cash requests 2 weeks later. We know what's not here are expenses providers have incurred but have not yet been able to submit in EGMS due to new programs, timing, and program delays. Next slide. Since our urgent meeting with the city and county representatives about 2 weeks ago, both funders have stepped up significantly. The county worked quickly to pay outstanding invoices totaling about $20 million, and the city went into overdrive too and has paid about $18 million. These payments are for funds due to LASHA under our contracts, and they are not extraordinary cash infusions. We appreciate how both the county and the city have partnered with LASHA to make this happen. In the next 15 to 30 days, we must get the $48 million owed to providers in the door. We are also requesting an immediate modification from the current cost reimbursement model to quarterly upfront payments to LASHA to cover expected invoices. Providers will still submit invoices monthly, but LASHA would have cash on hand to make much more timely payments. We will also ensure maximum amounts of invoices are included in reimbursement claims. And we will support service providers in submitting invoices by the 15th of the month. Our 60-day approach will expedite contract renewals by the start of 2024-2025 contracting process, connecting HMIS data and grants management system to link spending to program outcomes and activities. Looking at the longer-term horizon of 90-plus days, we suggest moving away from a cost reimbursement model, and we have some alternatives to suggest. Next slide. The entire system must adopt a more streamlined payment process and commit to right-sizing contract amounts to better reflect the actual cost of providing services. As stated in my last slide, we're requesting quickly within the next 30 days that the system provide LASA with a quarter of our total FY 24-25 budgeted allocation on July 1. LASA will submit quarterly reconciliation invoices, and the difference between the advance amount and the expenditure will be recouped in the next invoice. LASA will pay providers 1 month in advance on July 1 and pay invoices monthly within 30 days of submission. We're giving you details because we've thought a lot about this. This means there's no waiting period for funder payments to LASA before providers are paid. In the longer term, we hope the entire system will implement one of the payment models we're now investigating, which includes developing a flat rate, slot-based payment model like the one used for DHS case management, paying providers 90% of their allocated program budget quarterly and withholding 10% for reconciliation, and the model the state uses where they pay 50% upfront. Others may have alternative ideas, and we welcome that discussion. Next slide. I also want to provide you with an update on the Chief Financial Officer search. The CFO role, as you know, is absolutely vital for us moving forward. I've started interviewing candidates, and I hope to have someone in place this summer. I'm looking for a seasoned professional who can hit the ground running day one. Someone who gets this work, but is not a bureaucrat. I also know that I must hire someone who, like me, is not afraid to make big changes. Supervisor and Chair Horvath, I know you said it's time to pull off the Band-Aid and really look at our contracting and payment system. I appreciate your leadership and all of the supervisors for calling us together to have a conversation that is long overdue. I'm 1 year into this role, and of course, I didn't build this system, but I know it can and must be rebuilt because the suffering on the streets demands it. It's good timing, it seems, for the Auditor Controller to come into LASA and to keep up the momentum for transparency and change. It is important to remember that this urgent situation is a result of long-term problems within LASA, which I inherited and which I will fix, and systemic issues with the cost reimbursement model called out by the Nonprofit Finance Fund in 2019 and compounded by bureaucratic delays. This work is very personal to me. I didn't come into this job at LASA to be a bureaucrat and to allow things to stay the same. I came into this role to make changes so we can save lives and solve homelessness together. Because I know personally what it's like to not know if things are going to be okay. Because I too have experienced homelessness. In my first year as executive director of St. Joseph Center, my then husband's alcoholism grew so serious and dangerous that I was forced to move into a motel with my 2 young daughters. I am committed to improving the system because my girls and I know personally how quickly you can lose everything, even when you have a good job and a great education. Providers ensure that there's a safety net for people who don't have a mom and friends like I have who helped us make it through. My girls and I still wear the scars of that time we experienced homelessness, but they are getting stronger. And I use my lived experience to keep fighting for the moms like me who are trying to protect and save their children, and for the thousands of people who are living on the streets. I thank you for your time. I look forward to your questions, and I will now pass it on to my colleague, John Misery.
Thank you. Good morning, supervisors. My name is John Misery. I'm the CEO of the People Concerned, and thank you for the opportunity to be here today to discuss these critical issues. Unfortunately, the systems challenges we're facing now aren't new. They've been developing over many years, but have been managed by the service providers who can no longer sustain financing substantial amounts of debt and carrying receivables on government contracts that don't pay the actual costs of delivering services. Add to that the significant payment delays and cash flow dries up, leaving us to continue fronting millions of dollars each month. It is neither sustainable nor scalable for a system that must serve thousands of people a month. How did we get here? There are two fundamental problems that need to be addressed. The first is that all contracts must pay the actual costs of service delivery. The second is that the payment schedule needs to be updated so that we're not expending millions of dollars and then waiting months to get paid. From the time of expenditure to the time we're reimbursed can often be 90 to 120 days or longer, and waiting for contract amendments to be executed adds to accumulating debt because we can't even bill on those contracts. Here's how it currently works. If we have a contract that allows us to bill $1 million a month, but the actual cost of delivering services on that contract are $1.2 million a month, we're accumulating debt of $200,000 a month or $2.4 million a year on just that one contract. Multiply that by the dozens of contracts per organization and hundreds of contracts across the entire system, and we're amassing millions of dollars in unfunded expenses each month, year over year. And this has been going on for years. And it was exacerbated in 2017 when the entire system began to significantly expand to meet the growing demand. And the providers have been raising concerns for years about the need to update the financial structures of the contracts and payment system to accommodate the system's scale. And that hasn't happened. We've reached the perfect storm. The providers have been managing the deficits and cash flow shortages through private fundraising and using lines of credit for which we pay interest and aren't reimbursed. We've collectively reached the breaking point and can no longer carry the system. This isn't a problem just for larger agencies. It's a problem for all agencies, large, medium, and small. And we're aware there are many agencies struggling to make payroll, pay client rents, and other operating expenses. At the People Concerned, we're consistently carrying between $15 to $18 million a month in government receivables, not just from LASA, but also DMH, DHS, and a few smaller public sources. To be clear, the contract structure and reimbursement in arrears is not just with LASA contracts, but all government contracts. So the structural issue of mounting debt due to not being paid actual cost is endemic to all public contracts in our sector. Some of those funders pay faster, which helps cash flow, but doesn't address the underlying cause of the mounting debt being financed by private fundraising and lines of credit. My agency has an $8 million line of credit for which we paid $456,000 this year in interest, with another interest payment of $54,000 due in 3 weeks. And we're raising $10 million a year privately to subsidize our government contracts. And that's just my organization. My colleagues here and dozens of others around the county are struggling with similar challenges. We're here today to ask you to work with your city partners in LASA to do 3 things. 1, address the immediate cash flow crisis by clearing the backlog of past due invoices. That process has started, and we're very grateful to LASHA for getting those dollars out the door as quickly as possible. 2, revamp the payment process going forward so there isn't significant lag time between when money is expended and payment is received. And 3, level up all contracts to cover the actual cost to stop the accumulation and financing of debt. Without that, we'll be back here again very soon. After all the presentations, I'll be happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Good morning, Supervisors. My name is Kimberly Roberts, and I am the Chief Program Officer with LA Family Housing. I appreciate the opportunity to be here this morning and share our organization's experience operating in our county's homeless response system. Today, I represent the more than 15,000 participants we served last year across all of our programs, from street outreach to our 13 interim housing sites for families and individuals, and thousands of residents in our affordable and supportive properties, programs operated across the county in each of your districts. As referenced by Dr. Adams-Kellum and our colleague John Messeri, our homeless delivery system experienced enormous growth over the past 5 years, beginning in 2018 with the infusion of Measure H funds, and then later in 2020 with the flow of COVID relief funds. For LA Family Housing alone, we nearly tripled in size from the total number of participants served and housed, and doubled the number of public contracts from about 50 to 92, with the total dollar amount of those contracts increasing from $40 million in 2017 to $85 million today. At this scale, LA Family Housing is spending $2 million a week, or nearly $8 million a month, to provide direct services to people experiencing homelessness. Throughout this growth, we've advocated for change while continuing to operate under the reimbursement model of our industry, depleting our organization's reserves and drawing down from a $7 million line of credit. But we, like many other providers, have reached a breaking point. I agree with all that has been shared on how we got here, so I won't repeat those facts. Instead, I want to focus on the impact the current cash flow challenge will have on real lives in the next week. In our region, the impact will be felt by dozens of partner agencies and our 8 subcontractors, their staff and participants, including Bridge to Home, Antelope Valley Partners for Health, and Hope the Mission. The greatest impact will be felt in the next 7 days when LA Family Housing will be unable to process $1.2 million in time-limited subsidy payments due to hundreds of landlords for over 565 households who are currently in permanent housing. And when $1.5 million will be needed to continue services across our 15 interim housing sites and dozens of nightly motels, placing 1,000 households that make up over 3,000 men, women, and children at risk of losing shelter. And there are 1,000 more participants across each of our agencies and the county who will be affected by not quickly processing these reimbursements to providers. I appreciate your commitment to address our system's immediate cash flow crisis and the strategic partnership to update the long-term operational funding model in response to our system's current scale and service demands. Together, I am confident that we will create a system that best meets the needs of participants and responds to the organizational health of providers who are on the front lines. Thank you.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Thank you. Good morning, Board of Supervisors, and thanks for allowing me to present today. My name is Jennifer Harkdietz, and I am proud to serve as the CEO of PATH. And for the past 40 years, PATH has been serving people experiencing homelessness right here in Los Angeles, offering everything from outreach, shelter, and permanent housing. We operate in all of your districts, serving your most vulnerable constituents, and last year alone served over 19,000 people. So we are very proud to partner with the city and county, but we're at a breaking point, as my colleagues have shared. The payment delays we have been experiencing are significantly impacting our ability to address this crisis, cover our operational costs, and pay our staff. Across our contracts that flow through LASHA, we're floating nearly $8 million that we cannot bill to over 30 outstanding amendments. Those are amendments that may not have been processed yet. There's another $8 million billed through March, and we've obviously continued to accrue for April and May. So under our calculations, it's about $22 million. This is all sources of funding. So this is federal, this is state at about $2 million, another $8 million from the city of LA, and close to $10 million for county contracts. To continue to make payroll, we've made payments out of our reserves. we've searched for philanthropic funds, and we've taken out a line of credit as well. And despite these measures, we've still come dangerously close to missing payroll. Our payroll is for $3.3 million for close to 1,500 individuals that are using PATH to help pay their rent, buy groceries, and they're committed to the solution to end homelessness. So if we can't help them make their basic needs, they are going to search for employment elsewhere. Our payroll challenge is just one aspect of our operations that's been severely impacted. Another critical component are our relationships with vendors. These are key partners in our work. They include our IT vendors, our food service, security, utilities. If we are not paid on time, our vendors are not paid on time. And not only do we risk thousands of people being without essential services like our daily meals and shelters, but we also face losing vendor relationships or increased prices to account for delayed payments. We need more partners in this work to get to the solution for this crisis, not less. So we need to show that we can make good on our commitments. As was mentioned, homeless service providers, we are truly the safety net that many people rely on, yet our system is not set up to meet the scale of the crisis. We're talking about today, but there are days when folks want to scale, right? And we're not ready. So we need to be able to fix this payment model so that we can meet that scale that's needed. We also need our contract and reimbursement policies to be clear, effective, and predictable. We need to understand the barriers that impede our ability to receive payment and all work quickly to eliminate them. We all share in the responsibility to make our contracting straightforward and transparent, but ultimately these structural changes need to come from city and county policymakers, all of you who we're grateful to be here with today. PATH's programs and services have brought many people's indoors, as I've shared. We even were able to be successful in meeting functional zero in District 4 in Signal Hill. And in no other sector would we expect vendors or businesses to provide a service without timely payment. Homeless service providers are expected to do this on a daily basis. This is a time, as I mentioned, when scaling and expanding efforts is needed. But if these ongoing payment challenges continue, our sector cannot function. And inevitably, we will not be able to scale, but we will also have to scale back, leaving people in great need. So I'm hopeful that this is the beginning of a fundamental shift to a better model, and we are definitely willing to be part of the solution. So thank you.
Thank you. Please go ahead.
Morning, Board of Supervisors. Herb Patanaka, I'm the Executive Director of Special Service for Groups, SSG. You're probably wondering, what's this guy doing here? I'm proud to tell you that since 1990 and the founding of HOPEX, HOPEX has been a division of SSG since 1990, since its original founding. It's, I guess there's some solace in knowing that your colleagues are facing the same thing. I thought we were the only ones worrying about how we're going to make payroll in another week. So thank you to the board for moving this issue forward and looking at this issue. I certainly concur with what John had to say about the disadvantages or the hiccups resulting from cost reimbursement contracts and being paid in arrears. I can see from different proposals, I try to fix that or a modification of that. I'll just make those comments at the end that I don't think that's a workable solution, and I'll give you a number of reasons why. So let me tell you the situation at SSG HOPEX, and so you get the kind of magnitude of the problem from our perspective. So we are floating on an ongoing basis close to between $10 and $12 million just for our homeless programs. And this is money that we've already paid out as an organization and we are awaiting to get reimbursed. Master leases, client rents, salaries and wages, facility costs, insurance costs, everything else, those are paid, as you know, and we're awaiting in this cost reimbursement arrear system to be reimbursed for those. At any point in time, I check every day. I checked this morning. Our AR for homeless programs is $11.8 million. We appreciate the strident work of Dr. Adams and pushing LASHA to pay us on a more timely basis. But what happens is we get paid, but at the same time, money is going out the door to meet ongoing new expenses. That's the roundabout of this kind of cash reimbursement system. Of course, the speeding up and paying by LASHA, it will help, but it won't solve the basic issue about the need for working capital in advance of a month's worth of expenses. There is a federal model that many of us have some experience with that's well heeled. It's in the federal system, and it is a system of downloading from a system, making cash requests at the front end of a period against an unapproved contract, and making those cash requests at the beginning based on our projections and based on the totals of our particular contract. The system works very well where it doesn't change any of the compliance issues. It doesn't alter any of the restrictions on the use of public funds, including federal funds in this particular case. And at the end of a period, we're required to submit a cost report and a reconciliation about the use of that money. So cash is used as a balance in your contract on an ongoing basis, and we're able to make requests at the front end of a period. In some cases, that front end is for the upcoming month, or in some cases, it's made as a cash request for the upcoming quarter. I'm telling you, the system works very well. It's responsible. We're still accountable for the money. There are instances where in the reconciliation, we owe money back, but it works. It's called the Federal Drawdown System, and it's much better than trying to tinker with a cost reimbursement model, and that doesn't overcome the idea of paying expenses in arrears. I want to make one other comment before I turn the mic over to my colleague Veronica Lewis for the solutions. You know, as providers, we're subjected to a great deal of scrutiny and critique. I'm concerned that this kind of discussion will bring out questions of there must be mismanagement, there must be misspending, there must be something wrong, public funding shouldn't work this way. And I just remind you that since the passage of Measure H in 2015, these contracts have been highly audited, not only by your auditor controller on an ongoing regular basis, but also the auditing units by our other funding sources. So as providers, we're confident about these numbers that we provide to you, that they're directly connected to our homeless programs and highly audited. One other thing I'll just tell you is that our independent audit that we commence every year, like all of us are required to do, the auditor warned us that with a AR in homeless programs of $10 to $12 million and our use of internal reserves to fund it, that it renders the agency, threatens the financial viability on the short term. His calculation of the amount of time needed to carry the receivables was 64 days, meaning that for a $10 to $1 million line, we have to cover that for 64 days. And then I just remind you that as soon as we're paid for those past expenses, we incur new expenses going forward. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Please go ahead.
Good morning. Thank you for having us here. Veronica Lewis, Director of HOPICS. I just want to say that, 7 years ago, there was a lot of excitement because we were proud of Los Angeles for making the deep investment that it did, largest local investment, I think, in the country. And although it was challenging, all of us sitting here and many folks that you can't see today say yes. And we've continued to say yes in the face of challenging bureaucracy, late payment, struggles, all kind of other challenges, because we are deeply connected to this work, and our organization's missions really are designed to meet the needs of the people in spite of. And one of the things besides the investment that I've been so proud of for the last 7 years is not only did LA commit, but we also have reimagined the work, right? We've re-examined our value systems in terms of eligibility criteria, high barriers, and we have shifted how we meet the needs of people, recognizing that everybody deserves a home, throwing away any ancillary, unnecessary, arbitrary requirements, and really doing a better job. And there's still a lot of work to do to serve people in a person-centered way. What we haven't done, given the scale and size, is reimagine the value system and thinking and the concept of how the service providers are partnering with our county. And what we've continued to do, regardless of the significant exponentially scaled up ARs, staff, workforces, vendors, subcontractors, et cetera, we have not looked at the actual flow of how the cost reimbursement system impacts detrimentally the financial health of our organizations. And I think that it's unfortunate that we've gotten to this crisis maybe to really get some movement. But here we are, and what I want to offer is, in the same way where we have recognized that many of the things that we were doing to meet the needs of the people were harmful and not working, and we've made those adjustments proudly, the things that we're doing in terms of contracting payments is not working for the provider community. We have partnered in good faith, and we want the county and the city to partner with us in good faith. And so what does that mean for us? We understand, in particular in this environment, there's a significant amount of accountability, transparency, clarity about what dollars are going where, what they're being spent on, and none of the solutions that have been offered by Dr. Adams-Kellum, by Dr. Hatanaka, and that I'm about to extend a little bit more about, do away with that. In fact, it continues accountability and continues transparency, but the notion that the money at the county and city levels has been allocated and is available and accessible to our public funders, but the service providers are struggling to pay while the money is sitting here, it just doesn't make sense anymore. And many of us have deeply invested in infrastructure and all kinds of other things to continue to grow with the system. And this is a very painful moment for us, because if something doesn't change, all of that infrastructure, not only financially, but emotionally, sacrifices in terms of time-wise, it's gonna be impacted, because we cannot continue to do this. We'll have to look at which contracts are costing us the most that we have to give back if they don't shift. And so beyond just giving the grant administrators like LASA, DHS, whoever else, the funds in advance, what we're asking for is we need quarterly, I'm not gonna call it in advance, we need quarterly drawdowns to add to what Dr. Hatanaka said. And we still submit the monthly invoices. We still submit all of the required documentation, as we know that that requirement is actually becoming more specific in the last couple of months. And LASA's team and the grant administrator's team is still looking at everything. And if there's money that needs to be paid back, as we settle each month or each quarter, we can do that, but we can no longer wait. And so even with our grant administrators, if they're receiving dollars in advance on a quarterly basis or maybe half a year, there's still a wait. And as we just said, our burn rates of $2 million, $3 million a week is just not sustainable. And it's not just our organizations and our payroll. We have over 14 subcontracts. There's many of the organizations who can't access the contract by themselves or don't want to because of these very reasons. And so they're relying on us to pay their employees, they're relying on us to pay their vendors. We have a lot of small businesses. 3 weeks ago, our maintenance company CEO was in tears about paying his own payroll because we couldn't pay him. And the reality is, obviously, we're going to pay our payroll first. We're going to pay rents. We're going to pay these things. But when the well is dry, the well is dry. And so I really hope that, one, thank you for pushing the money through. We can help you continue in that vein to make us whole. But I really hope that in the medium term, I'm not going to say long term, we really shift not only how you're getting money to grant administrators, but I really hope there's some true consideration for how you're getting money to the providers and moving away from cost reimbursement in totality. And the other thing I just want to say, Kim shared some of the numbers from LA Family Housing. I just want to say Hoppick served 28,000 people last year. Those are real people, real lives saved, hope restored. We are keeping almost 2,000 people off the street every night in a variety of interim housing programs, including 300 to 400 children. We are paying rent for close to 800 people every single month, and so on and so on. And these are not, idle, we're gonna be in trouble. If we don't get our money, something is gonna have to give. Vendors start walking away, or we're just having to not necessarily be able to pay as many employees. And some of these operations are critically important. 24-hour operations are expensive. And our interim housing system is so robust, and many of the organizations up here do a lot of that work, and there's several service providers not represented here, but it's expensive. And so I really am grateful for the opportunity to have the conversation. But again, we did a lot of work in the last 7 years to reimagine how we serve and meet the needs of the people, and I'm proud of the progress that we've made. And it's time now to stop talking about it, and it's time to do something about it. So thank you for your time, and we're all here for questions.
Thank you all very much. Thank you for painting a very clear picture for us this morning. I know it's a comprehensive assessment of where we are and where we need to go. And with costs increasing on top of the cost of delays, I agree with you. The time for action is now, and that's why we wanted to have this conversation. It's clear, and I heard very clearly here this morning, providers should be monitored and assessed with measurable outcomes that can track the impact, and you all are in agreement with that. You're not trying to change the requirements and what you're looking to meet. You're trying to make sure that payments are made in a timely manner. And so it's the payment model that must be streamlined, not made more bureaucratic for you in order for that monitoring to happen. I appointed myself to the LASHA Commission to better understand these issues. I thank you for the conversation that we had last December. I know that it was eye-opening for me, and these are ongoing conversations with our director of HI as well as with LASHA. And I wanted to make sure that we had this conversation as a county so we understand what it is we need to do in order to do our part to fix what is broken here. For our service providers, I have a couple of questions. I know you mentioned, John, that we were at a turning point in 2017 in particular. So for any of you, at what point have you surfaced concerns, and especially about the challenges of the reimbursement model, and how have you brought that forward before today?
Thank you, Supervisor. Well, in a variety of ways. And by the way, these issues have been structural long before 2017. This has been the business model. I always liken it to say, if we walked into Target and took a shirt off the rack and went to the cash register and it was $20, and we said to the clerk, we'll give you $15 and you go find the other $5, they would throw us out of the store. And yet that's how we've operated our businesses for a very long time. But back to the question of 2017, when Measure H passed, there was an enormous infusion. Kim referred to this, and then of course the COVID pandemic relief funds, in a very good and positive way, provided a surge of resources into the system. But the providers were raising this issue at the beginning of 2017. We talked about it in many forms. We've talked about it with HI. We've talked about it with LASHA, the then director. We've talked about it with staff. Some of you weren't on the board then, obviously, but this is not new information. So we have been continuing to raise these structural issues for a very long time. Dr. Adams-Kellum referred to the nonprofit finance fund that was done in 2019, which very much focused on the need for providers to make sure that you had adequate operating capital to be able to float these receivables. And in my view, that's really putting the onus on the providers, again, to fund government. That is not a fair or reasonable expectation. And the gap, so essentially what we've seen, and on top of that, in the last 7 years, the consumer price index has gone up 25%. The contracts have not adjusted anywhere near that. So we have income like this, expenses going like that, and the numbers are getting bigger over a longer period of time.
I just want to offer, in addition to lots of conversations, we've sent at least 3 formal letters, not only detailing the issue, but specifically asking or recommending things that could be done. So we've done that over the course of the last 3 to 4 years as well. So there's some documented
Letters to the
recommendations.
board, to the
Letters to the board, letters to the homeless initiative. Yes.
Okay, thank you for that. And are you turning down new contracts or limiting your expansion as a result of the issues that you've described today?
We are. We've turned down 2 just this week.
If you could turn on your mic, thanks.
We're looking at it because we're approaching a new fiscal year. Starting July 1, we're taking a hard look at trying to scale down on some contracts that are ending. We're not going to renew them. I mean, those are just strategies that we take. We have vacancies. We're not gonna fill the vacancies for now, going forward. And
You mean employment vacancies or housing vacancies?
both. And we're not taking on new master leases, which leaves a kind of shortfall in the demand at the door. Yeah.
And I would also add that just so you all know, during COVID, PATH opened 13 new sites in 6 months. So that's kind of how we typically operate in a crisis. Yet, as I think some of you know, we've had to say no to an additional expansion more recently over the last few weeks, but even in the last couple of months as we look at the new fiscal year, and we've returned contracts already for the new fiscal year. And I would say in the 10 years I've been at PATH, we've never done that before. It's always been our culture to say yes because we really know people are dying on the streets, and whether my entire team is working at interim housing sites or we're bringing in temps, we have had to stop a lot of that work and a lot of that growth. And so that's been mostly declared also by the board because we just have such an uncertain time right now. We want to make sure we can continue to do the good quality work for what we are being paid for.
And you mean your board has declared
My
that?
board, yes, thank you.
And for LA Family Housing, yes, we have declined new agreements and we've had to turn away and send back contracts or terminate those contracts at the end of this year. We've also put a freeze on additional hiring as a result of the uncertainty and concerns with being able to afford those positions long term. And additionally, where we've had to take on temp agencies to support with the social services work, we can no longer maintain those vendors. And so those agreements are not able to be fulfilled.
Anything? Go
Yeah,
ahead.
I was just saying, and most of this has happened in the last 3 months just because it's reached a point where we can no longer continue to front money. Because as Jennifer said, probably to our demise, we've said yes. One, because it just made sense, right? It was a natural expansion. We have the infrastructure. And certainly I support, I come from capacity building world, so I support bringing new providers in. That's why we have so many subcontractors. But the reality is, some of your core organizations saying no is going to cost you more to do the work, right? And some of your core organizations are the ones subcontracting with other providers that are trying to get in. So it's really in the last 2 to 3 months, most of us have started to say no because we can't. We have to reduce our expenses because as we're hoping to build trust with the county and our funders that they're going to make us whole and we're not going to have these long delays, we have to make business decisions to not disadvantage ourselves. But it is going to cost you more. Yes, you can bring other people in, of course. That in some cases, working with providers that have the infrastructure already who possibly can partner with them is a disadvantage to the system. I just have to lift that up for us to say no so much right now.
Thank you. And it's important for all of us to hear that, especially in light of the fact that just last year alone, over 40,000 unlawful detainers were issued, which means more people are falling into homelessness now that renter protections have been lifted. And so our need for your services is even greater. So thank you for sharing all of that information. Dr. Adams-Callum, I first want to say thank you for your courage and telling your story. I know it roots you and all of us in our work, and I really appreciate you sharing that and your leadership. I want to talk about at LASHA how our role at LASHA works within this environment. On the slides that you shared, it said that the typical repayment timeline is 45 to 60 days, which in some ways doesn't entirely match up with everything that we've heard today, in part because we know that what has been invoiced is one amount and what is outstanding is a different amount because of how our system works. So I want to start with part of a contributing factor to that is the contract amendment process. So why, can you help me understand why are so many contract amendments required and what keeps them from being executed quickly?
Thank you. I think that number 45 to 60 days is off because it doesn't account for the start of the expense on the provider side, which is delivered to us by invoice the 15th of the month past the month after that expense is incurred. So you're already looking at 45 days before the invoice is even submitted. If you add that, and then we said 45 to 60 once we receive that invoice and get the return from funders. So it's significant when you really look at all of that timeline. You know, since everyone knows I was provider for 15 years, I was struck by the amount of money and my board calling us the Bank of LASHA of why it took so long. And part of it is the contract amendment process. And for any contract that we might have an average of 10 to 15 different amendments, just ridiculous. And it is something as providers that we submitted to LASHA that it needed to change. When I arrived at LASHA, I asked the finance team, can you imagine a time when we have less amendments? What would it take to have less amendments? Sadly, some of those people aren't with me any longer. I didn't get an answer that I thought was what I should hear. My interim CFO has figured out how we can have less amendments because there are different ways that we change contracts that don't require the significant lift that we see now, which is causing a delay. Not to mention a broken EGMS system that shuts down invoice payments when we enter amendment process. And with constant amendments, then you're constantly shutting down invoice payments.
Thank you.
So I have broken into that and we are refining that.
Thank you. I do have a slide to share that reflects some of what we've seen over past month reports that we've seen at LASHA, and I thought I would share that here with my colleagues so we can see that, and if the executive office could pull that slide up, I know it came up earlier. I noticed in one of the trends that I noticed is that it appears the state pays up front and then prescribes how funding can be used. Has that been helpful, and is that a shift we should consider making across the board? As you can see in April, February, January, and both presentations in October, the state has been pretty consistent, but there are times where our federal partners, the county or the city, have been behind and where you needed us to be in terms of those payments. So is the state, by looking at this, would you say the state model is the model, or is it one that we should consider?
It is absolutely one that we should consider, and I believe I proposed that model of getting the 50% for the contract in advance and then reconciling. So that was one of the things I noted, and yes, I agree with you. That is one thing that stands out. It's not the only model. As Herb mentioned, there are some other models that we could look at as well.
And does that work as he described? Because I did see on the slides, there were times where our federal partners were also in arrears. So does that model work?
With your permission, may I allow the interim CFO to speak? Janine Trejo. Thank you.
Janine Trejo. Janine Trejo, acting CFO for LASHA. There are different types of models when it comes to the federal dollars, and not all of them are on just the drawdown basis where you can take it up front. The contracts that LASA currently holds with HUD, those require us the same with the cost reimbursement model, where the providers have to provide their invoicing to LASA, we have to review it, then we do the drawdown in arrears. So there's various models, but the current model that we hold with HUD is the cost reimbursement model. The state model is more of the ideal model where the revenue is actually received, and LASA does have that revenue with cash on hand to be able to pay the invoicing as it comes through. That would then trickle down to the providers if we had that same type of model across the board with all of our funders.
Okay. You had a slide in your presentation. I think the title of it is Due from Funders. If we can look at that slide. Does this slide reflect the amounts that are invoiced or total amounts outstanding yet to be invoiced?
I think we're gonna put it up. Do you know what slide? Slide 11? Thank you.
So these are the outstanding receivables that LASA has. So these are the invoices that LASA has submitted. What I do want to highlight is there have been changes since this information. We do have the EFTs, the or ETFs, the electronic transfer funds authorizations that the county has noted, which would bring that down and turn it into cash on hand once that funding hits our bank.
So this is outstanding invoices by funder.
Yes.
Okay, and I see that the county is in the column of 1 to 30 days. Is that beyond the initial 30 days? Where the county is the only funder that is beyond 30 days outstanding? Is that what this slide says?
I believe that was resolved actually most recently, and you may be able to note that.
Yeah, those invoices have been paid, as well as the current is outdated as well. The HI currently has $9.4 million in invoices from LASA. One of those reflects 4 invoices. One of them is back with LASA. We're processing the other 3 of $9.1 million. All of those came to us last week on May 15th or 16th.
That's helpful. And I know also the mayor's letter to us this morning said that she believed there was 26 million outstanding, but this says 15 million. So I'm trying to understand what this slide is actually telling us.
Because of all of the movement that has happened recently with funds that are being transmitted, the electronic transfer funds authorizations that have come through, this has been a moving target. So some of the accounts receivable have not been entered in respect with the county with the 10.7 million that was recently received. So and we did receive an additional payment from the city. So that's where you're seeing some of the movement and the staff trying to update this early this morning.
Well, so given the movement that you just described, I mean, we're seeing a discrepancy in numbers, and I hear you explaining why that is. But given that as LASA, and I say we because I am chair there, but as LASA, we have the responsibility of oversight of a contract life cycle. Do you believe that LASA is capable of doing that given what you just described?
Well, I think we need to note that there's a difference between receiving it in our bank and it showing up in EGMS. So we are attempting to give you today's reflection. There is a delay and there's often a reconciliation, which we will do. That's why we meet actually 2 to 3 times a week to reconcile and update. So we pressed very quickly to give an update. And this is, again, a reflection today, but the mayor's letter is reflecting of yesterday's payment, and that doesn't always immediately show up in our balance. So it is a constant update, and we are capable of providing you with information. That's why we're able to tell you even now. There's payments yesterday, there were payments on Friday. These things take about 2 to 3 days sometimes to be entered fully and to show up in the EGMS system. What we did, which is a little unique, is we paid quickly. And when you pay quickly and we receive quickly, there is a lag from what you might see on the screen. But you will get an update. You will get further reconciliation by Friday. And we'll reconcile all of this by then.
Just a question for you, Madam Chair, as Chair of LASA. Do you all get on a monthly basis an accounts payable and receivable report by funder?
We don't receive it monthly by funder. We receive it in a variety of ways, and we have it. We reviewed it both at committee and at full commission. But this is this fundamental issue has been ongoing, and we have asked at our commission, at our recent commission meetings, even as recently as our last one, about, you know, the county provides an advance, so there has been a belief that the county's advance has helped to cover some of the costs and issues that have been surfacing. And meeting this moment, we have to, this is why I want to have the conversation, to uncover where the breakdown is happening.
And I would assume that a monthly accounts payable and receivable by funder report would give everyone, you as the board and everyone, clarity.
But what
on
I
where
hear,
we are.
agreed, and what I hear from our service providers is that what they know LASA to know is the invoicing piece, but your AR is not something that you provide up to the minute on a to LASA for them to provide that to us. Is that accurate?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. And then, do you think it would be helpful for LASA to narrow its focus on certain functions and limit program expansion, given what we've heard from our service providers, in order to focus in and hone in on solving these issues? Is that something that LASA should be doing at this point in time?
Well, I think our primary focus must be the administrative efforts, but our mission calls us to be a part of solving the crisis of homelessness and to drive solutions. We need to be able to do both, but our primary focus must be addressing this crisis. And as we have heard, it's systemic. Even when we pay in the same day, like on Friday, we got $10 million, 9.7 million went out the exact same day. We did the same thing yesterday. If we are not paying the providers the costs and they're carrying it for 100 and some odd days, even as we are, and we will clean up the administrative piece, we still have a system that is not funding the system properly. I believe that the work that LASA does in partnership with providers to address the crisis on our streets is very important. It is one part of the various aspects of what we're called to do, what our mission calls us to do. When you all have said we have an encampment there or a family that's struggling in a car, oftentimes LASA's had to step up with the providers to save that life. I wouldn't want to see in this time of crisis a retraction of that work. But this issue right here is my primary focus, and I'm losing sleep, as you can imagine, and I should. Because
We all are.
this must get addressed.
Yeah, and so for our service providers, how does that match up to your experience in terms of ability to continue to provide service?
Losing sleep?
Well,
Worrying about payroll? No.
Are having to narrow a focus.
Look, we're in this for you can tell by the commitment by everybody here. We've done things above and beyond what's considered good managers, I guess. We're in this for the long haul. We've invested, as Veronica said, in these programs. We're not shying away from it. We just need these fixes. And it seems like you all are well healed in terms of an understanding of what the complexities are, and you all seem to be receptive of some of the fixes that are there. So
Yeah, I think, unfortunately, there's so much despair in our county and not enough resources. And so conceptually, we welcome all the supports that are brought online to get people inside quicker and help keep them inside and help stabilize and support all the health related conditions. At the same time, I, really would appreciate, and I know LASA's the Titanic, right? And I've said this, Dr. Adams, it's going to take some time to turn it. But there are some deeply rooted challenges. Some of them are structural. LASA did not create them, right? Some of it is by nature of how they were created. Some of it is having all these different bosses. Like, we understand all those nuances. And some of them are just structural at the organization. And I think that a grant administration function, there's still, and some of the things that Janine has come up with are amazing. So we're excited about what's going to happen effective July 1 to get rid of the amendments. But there's a lot of work that still needs to be done. And so if that's what you were asking us, I strongly support focusing on shoring up all aspects of grant administration. Some of it, you all are gonna have to make some decisions to support LASA to address some of the things, but some of them are just internal. And I think that we are desperately in need of having a narrow focus on having our largest grant administrator for the homeless response system get to the level that we need them to be in terms of grants administration.
And to my colleague's question, is there a mechanism by which you could share your AR with LASA today?
Yes, we've been doing it every day for the last 2 weeks, and Dr. Adams kind of been saying it, but absolutely, because I'm also concerned about, making sure you all have a full picture.
Agreed.
Yeah, I want to second what Veronica said. I think that all of us are so dedicated to the mission, LASA included, but I think LASA's, first and foremost, as Dr. Adams-Kellum said, is a good grant administrator. And then what's next is kind of how I think of it. Because if we don't have good grant administration, it doesn't matter how much LASA scales up if we all are scaling down, because we know that we have more flexibility, we have relationships, right? Like, there is a crisis out there for everyone who wants to be involved. But ultimately, for PATH, for many of us, we're talking 40 plus years of commitment to the community. So for us to say we're not scaling up, there is a fundamental, problem with the system. And I just want to call out the numbers as well. I just did a quick, it looks like LASA needs to fund providers through the original slide you said, about $62.5 million a month. So, even if we just divide by 12 and we do some simple math, we need to make sure that cash flow is going to LASA with some of the solutions that Janine and Dr. Adams-Kellum have shared. And I do ultimately believe we're all open to auditing and accounting, LASA included, but we got to get the money out so that we can stop the suffering on the streets.
And my final question for everyone is, how would you like to see the county partner with you in order to address this problem?
I again want to extend my appreciation to the board for having us here today. I think having open and transparent conversations and really getting to the root of the problem is really important, and I hope that the county will continue to do that. I think our experience as providers is we've had a good working relationship with County HI. We've had a good working relationship with LASA, tense at times, as you can imagine. We're in a difficult position. LASA is one of our largest funders, not just for the people concerned, but for the system. So there's a power dynamic that's always at work, and we're mindful of that. And I think as providers, we've lifted this issue up. I think we've done everything we can from our perspective, and that's what brought us here today. So I really want to thank you for, continuing these conversations, because we all want to solve the problem. No one sitting here is asking for the dismantling of LASA. In fact, quite the opposite. We providers need, you, the board needs, the system needs LASA to be an effective operator. And that's what we're trying to do, is to make it better. So I would just say the ongoing conversation and being able to really drill down and get to the root of these problems is going to be critically important, so that we're not back here in 6 months talking about the very same things we've been talking about for years.
And I would just say a built-in way not to create any more administrative burden for the board to be looking at these numbers more often, not just when there's a crisis, but be looking at this stuff more often and figuring out what the right mix of the technical response, which this is, versus the reality, right, for things that can't be reflected in here for a variety of administrative reasons, and figuring out how to have forms where maybe twice a year or quarterly, there's some engagement with your offices and the provider community to hear our perspective directly. I mean, of course, we'll sound the alarm when we need to, but that's not the kind of relationship we want. We want to be having ongoing conversations, and not that LASA or DHS or anybody's going to withhold information. That's not what that's suggesting. But I think that we have a perspective that you may not be getting if you're not talking to us, not just when we sound the alarm, but just to understand what's happening in our system, and just accountability all around. And obviously, you know, lifting up the things we ask for. Again, true consideration of shifting how cash flows to not have the providers hold the system up, and really exercising bold leadership to finally make that change in the near term would be much appreciated. But thank you for your time and allowing us to even have this much space and time with you.
And Dr. Adams-Kellum, how would you like to see the county partner in LASA as part of LASA to change what we're talking about today?
Well, I think we have to go back to come forward. I think the Nonprofit Finance Fund did give us some ideas of some shifts that we can make. I believe the accountability that we will share together is, yes, our reporting and the refinement for the commission. I think even today I've heard some things that we can do differently. I think we need to make sure we're setting time aside in committee to really comb through these things. I do hope that the board will invite me back every 30 to 60 days. I want to be accountable to you. I want to speak to you directly. I'm willing to meet in your offices in any way we need to get to the bottom of this. I'll be watching this every single day, and I'm happy to update you. I do think it's time for change, and I hope we can do that together.
Thank you. Supervisor Barker.
Thank you, and I want to thank you, Chair Horvath, for bringing this item before our board. And you know, I appreciate what you said about how the perception is going to be that there's something wrong going on. I mean, I remember when Supervisor Horvath and I met with Dr. Adams-Kellum to talk about doing a fiscal audit, and people perceive that as there's a problem. It was in fact generated by a request from Dr. Adams-Kellum for us to do this in order to start fresh and see what's going on and better understand how our system is working out. So I want to acknowledge the work you're doing. The irony for me is that many years ago, the money was front-loaded in response to LASA not having the cash flow. And what I'm hearing is throwing money at it's not going to fix it. It's a structural issue that needs to be fixed. And whether it be the state model or the federal model, the time has come for us to look at that long term. And the other irony is this is nothing new as it relates to county contracts. I remember meeting with Hillsides, who had a $1.5 million line of credit. This is 15 years, 20 years ago. And they were having to draw down on their line of credit because the county was 60, sometimes more days late in giving them reimbursement. And so they were paying interest that they don't get reimbursed on, they eat. So this is something that is long overdue in terms of discussion, but it's not unique to LASA. This is something that I heard, I don't know if it was you, John, that talked about mental health, DHS. I mean, this is a systemic issue that we need to address. The difference is that with Measure H, the thought was all this money's coming down, we're gonna be able to solve the homelessness crisis in real time, working with our partners. And I wanna thank our partners. You know, the work that you do up in the Antelope Valley, when I hear you say what you're gonna have to maybe do in terms of cutting back, breaks my heart, because I've seen and looked in the eyes, especially the families that are being served up there as a result of the work that you're doing, you as well, John. So I wanna thank you all for the work that you're doing each and every day. But make no mistake, this is not an I gotcha. This is not even an accusation that there's something wrong going on, because quite frankly, we've got an auditor controller that is going to make sure that everything is done above board, but you acknowledge that. You said that there are checks and balances to make sure that at the end of the day, if there's overpayment, that it can be reconciled. But I also hear that just fixing the invoice is not going to fix this problem. We have to look at what we're paying for the services and do it in actual time. And I know that we did a study that came forward that acknowledge that in fact we are not paying the costs associated with the services being provided. I know we're looking at that and trying to right-size that, but we need to accelerate it. So my question to you, Dr. Adams-Kellum, is staff-wise, in terms of getting this done, is there something we, the county, can do to help you to front-load the actual cost associated with the services provided, so that when People's Concern spends $1.3 million on a contract that's only getting reimbursed $1 million because the actual cost is 1.3, that we bridge that gap?
Well, there's a few things. We've been talking about the true cost of the work, and that analysis needs to go forward. We need to articulate it. DMH has a model of looking at costs, and the costs are reimbursed. And that's a model that I think we need to look at. I think we need to analyze whether we have the right staff to do this. We're not planning to grow at LASA. I promise you that. We're trying to figure out if we need to retract in some areas and deepen in the areas that we're describing here. So that's what's on my mind. I can't say I need more staff. I need staff focusing on the things they need to be focused on to move this forward. And that's what we're looking at. That's why we have our interim CFO looking at all these systems, and a new COO to determine that we have the right pairing with the issues that we are responsible for working on. Because of the great work of Shri Tordoff, we have done this, and our partners at Hilton Foundation, we do have an analysis of costs. It's long overdue. We've already made adjustments in contracts on some of those that you've heard about from Apton Associates, and we are planning another round of increases for this upcoming fiscal year. So Cherie is holding us all to task to move that forward, and we're working with the city partners to ensure that those contracts increase as well. That's long overdue.
Right.
And the reprocurement of the system, which is also on deck, will allow us to right-size some of these contracts as well.
So what I would say, and Cherie, I mean, you're nodding in agreement, but my concern is we're going to do that, and then with the cost of living, that gap we just kind of filled, but now,
right,
it's still a gap.
We have days to fix this.
Yeah.
To look at the right side.
And then you're going to build in something that adjusts each year for cost of living.
That is as we come back to you with funding, we included funding in 24-25 for an adjustment. As we come back to you, and we're already starting our 25-26 funding cycle, we will come back to you with recommendations for those cost of living adjustments.
Okay, I mean, I guess I would say to my colleagues, and I'm not going to hog all the time because I know we all have questions. You answered, you did a really good deep dive in terms of what we need to talk about. But what I will say is that, you know, with Mayor Bass's letter, she's owning what the city needs to do and has acknowledged that the bureaucracy is becoming an impediment to the services that we all are committed to getting out on the street and doing it in real time. To your point, if we in our district have a family that needs help, we call you, and in real time we want you to get out there and help that family. That's our expectation. It shouldn't be driven just by a board office calling and saying there's a family. It should be happening before a board office sees it. And my concern is, based on what I'm hearing from all of you, is that that type of service may be curtailed, which then will create I don't even want to use the word hardship because that doesn't seem strong enough for what would happen to people who are suffering on the street. So there's no question in my mind that the city is all in, Mayor Bass is all in. I don't know about you all, but getting a letter like that, owning and saying, we know what we've got to do, we've got a problem, we're going to fix it. We know what we've got to do. And we've got a problem here in the county that we've got to fix. And Cherie, I know you're up to it because you constantly bring to our attention issues that we need to address. And this is just an issue that I think is not insurmountable if done correctly and done right. And that means not throwing money at the problem, but in fact looking at not only how we do the reimbursement on the invoices, but also the rates that we're paying, so that we don't cause our nonprofits to go underwater. And that is our goal. The only people that are going to be unhappy are the banks who are getting a lot of interest on the money that they're loaning you, which I can live with. With that, I just want to say again, as someone who is on LASA with our chair and with the mayor, our goal is to right the ship. I think you called it the Titanic. The Titanic sunk, so we don't want it to be the Titanic. But we want you to succeed. We want you to succeed. Because at the end of the day, when you all succeed, when we get our homeless count that's going to be coming out in the not too distant future, we can actually focus on exactly why we're all here today. And that is to address what's going on our streets, and help people that are the most vulnerable. I tell people this county, 3/4 of our budget is health and welfare. It goes toward those that are almost 3/4, goes toward those that are dependent upon us to help them, which means that they're dependent upon you all to help them as well. So I'm all in. I believe that for anyone that's perceiving this as a Rome is burning and there's failures in the system is wrong. This is about transparency. This is about addressing what probably is long overdue to be addressed. And again, before FESIA, before any of us were elected, I don't even think, Supervisor Solis, you were on the board yet. When LASA came and said, we have the inability to pay our payroll and our providers, we front-loaded money and said, okay, here, that should take care of it. And didn't really look at what got them to where they were that day. And now it's snowballed, and here we are. So, Chair Horvath, thank you for letting me be a co-author on this and bringing it forward, because I think this is the beginning of what I believe is going to help across the board, not just the providers here, but the ones that you subcontract with, who I think one of you all said can't compete for the contracts, but is equally as committed to addressing helping the unhoused. So thank you.
Supervisor Hahn.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And again, thank you to everyone for being here today. And I echo what my colleagues have said so far, particularly about our providers and how grateful we are to all of you for doing this hard work. Dr. Adams-Kellum, thanks again for your hard work and again for sharing your own personal story. And the line that struck me was how you did not take this job to be a bureaucrat. And yet that's kind of where we're all finding ourselves today, is battling the bureaucracy as much as we're battling the crisis of our unhoused population. But the providers, and when Measure H was passed in 2017, that was the idea, right? That was the educational campaign that we convinced the voters was, we're not going to set up a whole new bureaucracy. There's already providers that are doing this work. They're the ones already on the ground. They know what they're doing. This is just a way to get them the resources that they need to continue to do the good work. We weren't going to try to take on that work as a county. LASA wasn't going to take on that work as the city-county joint powers authority. It was going to be the providers. That's how we convinced everyone to say that this was going to be an efficient use of taxpayer dollars. So to find ourselves in this situation where the very folks that we highlighted as why this was a system that would work is frustrating. It does feel like deja vu for me and some others, I'm sure, because it's not the first time we've been in this situation discussing the contracts and payments to our providers. 4 years ago, we were in the same place where contracts were not being executed in a timely manner, thus causing what you're describing today, our providers to float their contracts using credit cards, accumulating hundreds of thousands of dollars in interest, learning that we don't reimburse for interest. We learned that 4 years ago, understanding the problem. And Veronica, you were talking about how after you were questioned, how yes, you did write letters to the board. In fact, it was a letter that you wrote that Supervisor Barger, you and I introduced that motion to expedite the contracting processes. And that's the report that we got back. That's what that motion said, was we got back this report. And this report told us, and we did shift, right? We now approve Measure H recommendations sooner. We streamlined the funding agreement process between LASA and our CEO, and we provide upfront funding. And LASA also modernized your grant system. So it's frustrating, which I'm sure it is to you as well, that despite these changes, which were good changes and which were recommendations, we still can't fix this problem. LASA says they're not getting our funding, the county funding, in a timely manner. Our CEO is saying that 3 months of upfront funding is provided, but they can't seem to get, LASA can't seem to get their contracting together. And Veronica, yeah, I'm sorry I used a Titanic description, because the last thing we want to do is just rearrange the deck chairs as the ship is going down. So hopefully, listening to everything you're saying, it becomes very clear what I think and I hope we can actually do to fix this problem. And I appreciate Chair Horvath that you started off by saying, this is not pointing fingers, right? There's probably enough blame to go around. Mayor Bass has been so clear about modeling a new behavior between the county and the city that we're not pointing fingers, we're locking arms. Once we find out what the problem is, we want to solve it. And hopefully this will be the last time that we have this kind of in-depth discussion. But thank you, Chair, for bringing this forward. And thank you to you and Supervisor Barger for putting yourselves actually on LASA to try to understand the problem and change it. That's never been done before. So to say we're all in is just kind of an understatement. Like, we are all in trying to solve this problem. So one of the things, just a couple questions. I'm trying to understand, Dr. Adams-Kellum, I think you said something to the fact that the systemic problem is we're not funding the system properly. Can you just elaborate a little bit more on what you meant by that statement?
Well, I want to clarify. You're right. When we designed Measure H, and I was a provider at the time, and we were in meetings almost every day, like how we're going to scale it, there was a lot of thought put into that, and that's why I raised Measure H as an example of what's working. But that is, while it's the largest portion, it's not all of the funding that comes through. So I think it's important to note that. I think there's a few things that we have to consider. One is, what are the bureaucratic delays, the problems with EGMS, the issues within LASA that I'm addressing? That has to shift, and we are already working on that, and that's going to continue to be in repair and our focus. But there is also the cost reimbursement model itself that you've heard a lot about. It's systemic. Providers spend the money in the first, say April, and they don't bill till May. You're already upside down. You gotta wait till the 15th of the next month to start to bill. And because LASA doesn't hold any of those funds, holds a very small percentage of funds, say any, small percentage of funds.
You don't have any reserve.
And with the scale, right, and with the scale, we then have to submit our bills to the funders. That's that 45 to 60 days. So you can already see, if you count that, and with the scale and the growth since 2017, you can see why we're in the position we're in. And then there's one more thing. Providers know, and I've been a provider, that this is mission work. And we fundraise, and we have boards that allow us to get lines of credit, but this just doesn't scale and it's not sustainable. And you're hearing from providers. We started having some very serious, and I said to all of them, because I've been on the other side, in the last couple of weeks, the conversations changed significantly. It became, not only are we serving, the providers serving life or death, they're in the life or death space. This has really come to a head, and we must address it.
But is it
So
how they're getting paid, or is it?
it
the
is both
amount of
how
money?
they're getting
'Cause
paid
I think about,
and it's the amount
yeah,
they're
because
getting paid, because the costs have not been
Right, they have
raised.
not
And
been
again,
keeping
that
up.
nonprofit
Right.
finance fund discussion we had was the first we were having to say, there's acknowledgement that we aren't getting paid for the dollars that we're spending. I don't know if it's 80 cents on a dollar, now it's with the inflation, it's 60 cents on a dollar, but that's not sustainable. And you can't fundraise that to close that gap.
Herb, you talked about what you thought was a better model, which was the federal drawdown model. Would you say, I mean, I think I was going to ask all the private, who do you think's the best funder in terms of how you get, is it the county, is it the state, is it the federal government?
Hey, the counties are
And if
number
it-
one. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, and in terms of how it works.
No,
Which
I
one
just
do you
I
think
just
is-
say it's worth looking at, because look at the orientation. In the federal drawdown, they're asking you to make projections on going forward, whether it's 1 month or whether it's 3 months. And then that results in a cash request, and it's cash request against your contract that's approved, if it's a grant or a contract, federal contract. So it's a grant award, it's done against that, and then we have to keep track of it, and then the following month, before we're making a new request, we have to report what was used and what the upcoming month cash request would be. And why that's particularly important, I think, is because when we use that system, we don't automatically apply for 1 month, 1/12 of a 12-month award automatically. We have to justify what the request is. And some months our costs are higher, so our cash request is going to be higher. And so we have to provide a lot of detail for it.
But you still think that's a better,
Yeah, because it's going forward. All
Yeah.
all the other discussions is trying to fund something where we're paying in arrears again.
right? Is that a model that we could use in the county?
Good morning, Supervisors. Felicia Davenport, CEO. I think one of the issues that we are sussing out right now is we receive, even in the homelessness rehousing system, federal and state funding. And those federal and state funding guidelines don't differ from our other departmental funding. Much of our federal funding, which funds a substantial portion of the county budget, is cost reimbursement. It's almost like the federal way. It's designed in the DNA of the budgets of our departments. So our departments, they submit claims to the federal government and they get reimbursed. I'm not suggesting that that is, necessarily a good or a bad thing, but it's to be distinguished from the Measure H dollars, which are local dollars that the board has full discretion on and could more easily direct and modify how those dollars are used to reimburse providers in the homeless rehousing system versus our federal and state dollars, which even the county itself is sort of, because we have agreed to accept the grant funds, the federal grant funds, and provide services. We are agreed into that claim
So, but
reimbursement.
in terms of what we have control over, is that a model that we should look at?
I think we should look at it, and I think we have already started to do that with the advance that we provide with the Measure H dollars. I think the question is what amount of that could be scaled or expanded, and I know that there is a work group that's talking about rates so that the rate reimbursement would actually cover the actual cost, And then I think this is a follow-on to that discussion, saying now that we know what the actual rate is, then can we add more flexibility to the payment mechanism for the Measure H dollars?
Thank you. And I'm sure this board would appreciate that this task force or working group, give us, the results as quickly as possible that we can begin making changes. There's no way after this meeting that this board is going to want to wait 6 months till we can figure out how to change things. Cherie, I was going to, the other thing we did, our chair, when she first came into office, she also declared a state of emergency as it related to the homeless crisis, coinciding with the city of Los Angeles' declaring a state of emergency. Some of our cities have done that. Cherie, are you using that emergency declaration to expedite payments and contracts as it relates to some of the things that we're hearing today?
We are certainly doing that countywide with our county departments.
Because, we heard from someone who said it's not just the county, it's not just LAHSA, it's county departments that they're finding slow payments. So why aren't they using this expedited emergency declaration tool?
Yeah, I think we will need to hear from our county department specifically about their reimbursement practices, but I think it's the same issue we're talking about here, that providers are incurring the cost and then submitting the invoice and getting paid what ends up being some number of months after they started incurring the cost. So it's the model of reimbursement that's used, which is sometimes connected to the type of funding that the department is administering, where they may or may not have that flexibility to do that type of advance or working capital.
Could we ask you to, and Thesia, to follow up on that? Again, I'm not going to want to wait to hear from county departments. You're the head of our homeless initiative. We want you to, urge our county departments to use this emergency declaration if it is a tool that they can use to expedite contracts and payments.
Supervisors, I will work with Cherie. We'll do a sampling of the department. So we'll do a sampling of invoices and see what the turnaround time is once we receive the invoice from LAHSA, of how long it's actually taking to get those invoices paid, and then directing the departments to leverage as much as possible the emergency declaration to get them paid as soon as possible, recognizing that that won't address the overall structural issue, but it will relieve some pressure on the cash flow.
Madam Chair, Supervisor Hahn,
Yes.
Some of these are not homeless connected. It's mental health, public health,
Right.
health. So it's it's our contracting in general. So
Right,
Cherie,
but-
you're more than welcome to take on the entire county.
But it's specifically in relations to how they contract with the homeless crisis. And again, this emergency declaration gave everyone this fast track tool for procurement, for contracting, and I would think it would also cover maybe payments and it's the giant scissors to cut the bureaucratic red tape that we need to happen in all county departments to make this work.
We'll do a sampling and get a survey back to the board.
Yeah, thank you. I think, I know my colleagues have some questions, and I think I had a lot of questions about what are you going to do differently, how are you going to solve it. I think I heard, particularly from Dr. Adams-Keller, you and Cherie, what we're going to do differently, and we really want that to happen, and we want to help you. The worst thought is if any of our providers in any way scale back or leave the system altogether because this process is not workable for them. There's no reason that any of us would support our nonprofit providers using their own credit cards to make payroll or to float for 30, 60 days, again, incur interest that doesn't get reimbursed. None of us are supportive of that. We want to fix this problem. So thanks again for the fact, the mission is greater than the mess we're in right now, and we respect that. Thank you.
Thank you. Supervisor Solis.
Wow, this has been a really great discussion. I want to thank our chair and Supervisor Barger, and I want to thank all the panelists. This is really something that should have happened probably a couple of years ago. And I just want to say that I have every, just sentiment for what I'm hearing from the providers again, because some of you we've spoken before. And I just want to add that about 2 months ago, I met with our providers out in the San Gabriel Valley. And to me, when we did pass Measure H, it was about expanding our reach. It wasn't just to overburden you all, but to build out in places that we were not. And when I look at HI, what we've done already, we're starting to chip away at it. But the expectation of our communities and our cities was so great. And we created a Blue Ribbon Commission also to look at why funding is not coming down, not just to the providers here today, but also to our friends and your colleagues out in the other parts of the district, county, and also to our cities. And you all have so much expertise. I want to see a strategic plan put forward with a timeline. It actually says these are the actual concrete things that are going to happen. Based on this discussion that we had today, and they're all great ideas, I think. But for me, the reality is we are soon going to be faced with going out to our voters again. And let me tell you, there will be people listening to this discussion. And we've got to fix it. And it is doable, and it's institutional. Just like so many things when we say bureaucracy, it's institutional. And we have to make those changes dramatically. And I hope our CEO weighs in with our departments, because I get it. You have formula-based funding for mental health, Department of Public Health, Department of Health Services, and all of that. And that we know they can probably do a better job to help some of you. But I also think, why were we not thinking that Measure H funding could be front-loaded? And to look at other examples, as was pointed out already, what the federal government does, we do that with Department of Mental Health, we front-load. So it's not that there's an exception here. We should find out where we are off and make that change and make that alignment, because soon we're gonna see figures perhaps more homeless. We're gonna get more people that are gonna say, how is our money being spent? Why is it not reaching the providers? And I certainly don't wanna see you all struggling. I don't. I mean, I know, I don't speak for everybody on the board, but there are a lot of my cities that are just hungering to see some of these services expanded in a way that doesn't want to ruin what you're doing, but they too are compelled to feel hopelessness, that hey, what is going on with this? And LASHA, I don't blame LASHA. I'm glad you're there, Dr. Kellum, Adams Kellum. I'm happy you're there. I'm glad to have heard your story. That's one part of it, but now shake it up. Shake it up. And I think all of us have an obligation to do that, and to be strategic, and to make sure that we really speed dial getting money and corrections, whatever we can do legally with county council, whatever help you need to expedite, so we don't step on each other's toe or get in a quagmire with the city of LA, with your attorneys and our attorneys, so we can get this job done. That's really basically what I want to say, that this isn't working properly, and it has to be better, because there's too many people that are waiting to see this change. And I can tell you, as someone now who represents a far larger part of LA City and Skid Row and other areas where we're seeing fast-paced growth, especially with children and women and children. And I have yet to hear anything about that. And I'm telling you, the communities out there are very, very upset. And they don't know who to blame. So they're not just blaming LASHA or anyone else, they're blaming us. We are also responsible. And so if I'm gonna show my face out there in public, I wanna make sure that I have the backing and support, the full throttle support of all of you, the county, the city, and that we're all going and rowing in the same direction. And that we don't somehow bankrupt our providers, who I have heard can't even afford to stay housed. Some of the folks that work for you all. That to me is disgusting. Come on, what is going on here? So let's do our work. Let's also battle in Sacramento if we have to, or the feds with HUD, and see where we can get some relief here, because we are the epicenter of homelessness around this country. It isn't necessarily New York, it's here. I mean, let's wake up and do something. So I'm ready to roll up my sleeves, and I have been. Thank you, Madam Chair, for your help.
Thank you. Supervisor Mitchell.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First of all, Dr. Tanaka, thank you for your opening statements about, particularly in this climate of audit, that this conversation should by no means be perceived as any sense of a lack of confidence in terms of the appropriate use of funds. That's really important. I'm glad you said that was at the top of my list. This is about a payment timing issue. This is about infrastructure, but this isn't about misappropriation at all. So I think whoever in the public is listening needs to be very clear about that there are all kinds of bells and whistles and accountability and bootstraps that have been subscribed to you all in terms of accountability. So I want to make that abundantly clear. I want to thank you, Dr. Adams-Kellum, for your first slide where you said that you wanted to level set. I think that's very helpful. You know, our governance structure, we operate as a committee of a whole. We don't have a finance committee. I'm glad that LASA has a finance committee to dig down into the level of details. And while I appreciate your offer to come here monthly, I would say maybe not. A bit, LASA has a finance committee. It's great to get that level of detail. I think what is appropriate for me as a member of this body is the 10,000-foot level question and inquiry twofold. Yes, there's an immediate problem that I am confident, based on this conversation and others at LASA, will be fixed. There is a longer term, intermediate, and longer term structural problem that I hope that we don't lose sight of because the immediate numbers are in front of us. That's typically what happens. This is human nature. You got to put the fire out in front of you. We know that there was a cause of the fire, but we get so consumed in putting out the fire in front of us, we forget about coming back the next day or whatever to the other problem. Lots of questions about when did we know, who knew. You know, I sat here and made notes and thought, I could go back to welfare reform 1994, a time just like this. When the crisis of the day was welfare reform, we told all the mothers to go to work, and we had a child care crisis. And there was a bank. I ran a bank like you did. Crystal Stairs was in effect a bank. About your size. There was a point in time I was about $500 million organization. And I say bank because the job was passed through like LASA. I made payments to providers. And when my funders were late, I had to go get a line of credit to make payments to providers to continue to provide the service with no reimbursement from the state. The years the state was late in passing their budget, I was making $10 to $15 million payments monthly with no love from the state when they finally passed the budget. And I hope technology has improved. Back then you'd have to wait for the check to come in the mail. Like, really? I hope we're doing better than that. I hope you're not waiting for mail checks from the county or the city or anybody else. When I think about Measure J, Ms. Lewis, you know, the problem as I see it is very easy for government and elected bodies to simply pass laws or a motion that says work harder, faster, with zero deep understanding about what it takes for our partner provider agencies to scale up. What it takes to scale up. When I look at LASA's slide that talked about a 5% admin rate, what we are talking about today is grant administration and people who are in a position to do the billing. How do you even have the infrastructure with a 5% admin rate to do what's being asked of you to do? I won't begin to ask the providers what your admin rates are, because you have to have the admin in order to provide accurate billing. It is really sexy to have a Measure H, to think that all the money goes directly to house the people. It takes people to do the work to make that magic happen. So your 5% admin rate gives me great cause for pause, because you may not have an adequate infrastructure in order to do whatever billing system that we come up with. And I would wonder if the providers have that adequate internal infrastructure also. That's not sexy. We want to imagine that all the money goes to beds, but you can't pay for beds and bill anybody if you don't have the woman power, manpower to do that work. So I never want that to be lost. You know, as I said, government, we expect things to happen faster and work harder. And we have an agenda item coming up where internally we have a department where service demands are exceeding delivery experience. And so both in our contracts and internally, we have to do better in terms of making sure that service demands and the expectations of our shared constituency are being met, whether it's external contractors or internal services. The cost reimbursement model is the devil. Hard stop. There is no flexibility. It's old and it's antiquated. And based on what you said, Ms. Lewis, it is based on a concept of lack of trust. It is government saying, well, these are public dollars and the public's going to hold us accountable. So you all have to prove 10 times that you spent the money the way we've told you to spend it. And so you're right. When Measure H passed, you all stepped up to the plate, like others have done throughout history, to say, I'm here to do it. But the core element of how government operates didn't change. And so the cost reimbursement model is a system set up for failure. It has not kept pace with technology, and it is grounded in a culture of lack of trust. And so we try to fix it piecemeal. I carried a motion in April, our equity in contracting, to try to help small businesses contract with the county because the county pays you late. We, in that motion, front-loaded loans. So we are addressing this on a piecemeal basis, the letter Supervisor Hahn talked about. But how do we have the time, the expertise to really address the real devil, which is the cost reimbursement model? That's the issue. I believe it's not just cash flow, it's also the adequacy of the reimbursement rate. And every time we do everything from vote for a mandated minimum wage increase, pressure on you. That's why we basically lost our board and care infrastructure across the state, because we pass kind of motions in silos and don't stop and acknowledge the cumulative impact it's going to have on the people we are expecting to do the work every day. So this is not new. I can go back in my own, recollection to welfare reform, passage of Measure J, and any others. It is any number of nonprofit sector service providers, faith-based service providers, who step up to the plate to partner with the safety net level of government to provide care and nurture to our residents. And you too have boards of directors who are looking at you like, you want me to pay for what? Go tell the Board of Supervisors, go tell the state legislature. The expectation that we all put on our service providers doesn't feel like locked arms with me, to me. I'm sure it doesn't feel like that most days to you. So there will be a short-term strategy. I hope that LASA will continue to request monthly accounts payable and receivable by funder reports, so you can see where that is. And I hope that we figure out ways in which we can come forward with a much more sophisticated strategy beyond a cost reimbursement model to engage with our partners. Yes, it's going to require federal and state understanding. That will take time. If there are examples, if there are specific contracts where a drawdown system has worked, is working, and if there are opportunities where it's a county mandated function that we can pivot there, I think with the board having heard about that model and how well it works, we would be willing to do that. I just don't want it to be lost on us that the cost reimbursement model isn't just impacting the homeless industry, the sector. It is impacting social service delivery across the board. And this is the group that happens to be representing for everybody today. And I really don't want that to be lost. I would ask if the service providers are in a position to give us projections that your organizations have done to understand the financial and administrative capacity needed to keep up with this current pace. We have asked a lot of you and are going to...
Our controller is here. If he could come forward to share with us where we are in the timeline of the audit that this board requested and what you need from us in order to keep it moving forward. Thank you to all of our presenters. I only have one question, so we didn't have to turn over entirely, but okay. It's okay, go ahead. Hi.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the board, Oscar Valdez. I have Robert Campbell with me. He's one of my assistant auditor controllers over the attestation services. First of all, thank you for the invitation to provide a update, but also thank you for entrusting the Auditor Controller's Office in conducting this urgent and necessary audit of LAHSA. Again, the goal of the audit itself is really not to really identify or pick on LAHSA, but it's really to provide them with a working tool for the new executive team, not just the CEO, but the incoming CFO with best practices and other observations and recommendations. So where are we today? I think right now, just wanted to update you that we have prioritized this audit. We did submit our report back to the board. I believe it was last month, April 23rd. We identified our specific audit scope. That was vetted through the board offices, our major stakeholders, LAHSA, the HI department. So with that, we have already engaged LAHSA with this. We issued our engagement letter last week that included a request of documentation in order to start the audit. We're scheduled to be with them tomorrow morning for our first entrance conference, and also to introduce the team that will be conducting the audit. So we're committed to basically ensuring that we have a hybrid type of audit. We are going to be on site and also doing some of the audit virtually, but for the most part, we're going to try to keep someone on site rotating to make sure that someone's constantly out there, through this process. We're envisioning roughly 120 to 150 days to complete the audit, but it's all going to be contingent on whether or not LAHSA provides us with timely responses, not just to our questions, but documentation. Again, this is going to be a partnership with LAHSA to make sure that we work with them together to get that information. You have our commitment to make sure that everything that we're doing is going to be very objective. All of our findings and recommendations are going to be based on evidence that we document, and we're looking forward to provide some clarity, to the operations of LAHSA.
I would ask, the JPA for LAHSA does provide that someone can be embedded into LAHSA in order to review the documents on site. The books and records of the authority in the hands of the Chief Financial Officer shall be open to inspection at all reasonable times by representatives of county and city. So for these purposes, and given that we know they're hiring finance staff, it might just be best for you to be there so you can do the work and make sure that it keeps moving.
Will do.
Thank you. Supervisor Mitchell.
What's the expectation of the audit? What are the parameters of the audit?
Well, scope of the audit, we're going to be looking at various areas. We're prioritizing the fiscal and the contracting issues right away, and we're also looking at possibly, doing some type of either preliminary type of report backs, maybe breaking it down to multiple reports depending on the types of findings that we have. So we're going to look at fiscal, we're going to look at contractual, we're going to look at risk management, we're going to look at grant management. But again, it's overall operations, pretty much, some of the discussions that were made here, one of the things that we will be looking at is the amendments. I think, we want to provide a little bit more clarity on those amendments, specifically those that are being brought forward to the commission for approval, whether they're in advance, whether they're retro, and, providing some type of observation and recommendation to move forward.
That's helpful. If I could ask, I think really our CEO in the context of the county and really separate from the audit, what are we going to do based on the previous panel and what we've heard? I know we got the letter from the mayor. I know that you, once it was brought to your attention, expedited a payment. What are we going to do absent these two actions have already been taken to free up money immediately? So month after month over month, the providers aren't in the same position they've been in.
Thank you, Supervisor. So I think one of it is us to continue doing our basically daily conversations that we're having with CEO Adams Kellum to see what the need is. So we've heard today that there are some issues, probably as early as next week. We also heard our HI director say that we have some invoices that we've received within the last 30 days. So the first question is, can we expedite payments for those? I think the answer is yes. We've done that last week or within the last 2 weeks, and that was basically working with the auditor controller. So I think part of the question is, what is the size and the scale that's on the horizon for the next, let's say, 30, 60, 90 days? Once we know what that amount is, we can look at, funding that we have in the HI budget, potentially that is not already allocated, our year-end savings, right? We're about to come to the end of the fiscal year. But that's what, it would be something like that. This is really sort of like an ad hoc remedy until we know the extent and the magnitude of the structural problem. So for us, I think it's continual conversation, assessment. We know we have something on deck for next week, but what's going to happen 30, 60, 90 days out? We're approaching the end of our fiscal year. There's probably some year-end savings to see if we can redeploy those funds quickly and expeditiously.
And will LASA need anything from the provider community in order to provide you with that data? Since everybody's here, I want everybody to hear it at the same time.
I think so. I think that they are speaking very intentionally, and there's been intentional conversation about this is what is happening next week. I can't wait for my normal month-end invoice. I think Dr. Adams Kellum is now turning around, calling the funders, including both the county and the city. And so we will do our part to figure things out until we get to a proposal and a recommendation for a more sustainable process, and then recommendations, the board adopting recommendations related to those.
And I would just, I think, say to my colleagues who serve directly on LASA, making sure that, as I talked about that admin rate, which is ridiculously low, making sure that LASA and the providers, have the personnel on hand to even be able to do that processing faster and accurately. I know there was always an issue. I will personalize it. I won't point to any of the providers. There was always an issue in billing with a back and forth about accuracy of billing. Well, if your billing's not correct, and that can be personnel too.
Yeah.
And so making sure that there are the appropriate resources to allow that billing to happen accurately and timely in order to get paid accurately and timely.
And if I could just add one other thing, Supervisor, as we embark in an intentional way on this topic about right-sizing the system, there is a finite amount of dollars within the Measure H budget. There is a finite amount of dollars within the county's very large budget. And so this may require us reprioritizing the priorities. We know there's a lot of other demands on county general fund, but what right-sizing really means and paying elevating the rate that it covers costs, at some point what we're really talking about is either adding additional resources or reallocating resources within programs, or some of the things that you heard earlier today, like the providers saying, no, we're not going to take on that contract.
And we constantly have that conversation about admin rates, what people are paying, the ability that we have as LASA to support some of our service providers in staffing up, and the technical assistance that they need. So that's a constant conversation. Some of it is driven by what funders will pay in order for LASA to be able to pay that. So to that end, Supervisor Berger and I wanted to end this conversation with a motion to direct the CEO Homeless Initiative to report back to the board in writing in 21 days with potential alternative models to fund the homeless service providers that would replace the existing reimbursement model and prevent delays to providers from having to perform contracted services until those services are funded, and then provide a verbal report to the board on the recommendations at the June 18th, 2024 policy presentations board meeting. Given that it is budget season, I think it's time for us to have that conversation so we can make sure that we are making the meaningful change that we need to and really understand. We've heard some good options here today to get that conversation going. And I too want to thank everyone who is here today for the conversation. Really appreciate your participation and partnership. Supervisor Solis?
You know, I just wanted to add, when you do your audit here, can we look at some of the structural things? I know we may not, as a county, have complete control over the amendments that are made to contracts, but what can we say that's constructive to help that so that it is public and everyone's on the same page about that, so we're not dragging this out any further?
Yeah.
I would just ask that.
Supervisor Berger?
And then following up on that, I know that we talked about the declaration for the emergency. Knowing that this also extends to contracts that are not directly tied to homelessness, can that emergency declaration be used for those contracts, or do we have to do something else in order to reevaluate how we are reimbursing?
Thank you, Supervisor. I think this is a situation where the board, we found a more efficient way to do things. And I think the question is really, why can't the exception become the rule? And I think we've already started talking about that. We can continue to talk to the departments. I think there is some room where we can do expedited contracting. And then there are other areas where there's probably another hurdle or barrier that might prevent us from implementing that to all the contracts. But we can certainly, in our survey, we can certainly take a look at that and make recommendations to the board that we should extend that to these other areas.
Okay, and I also want to thank the Auditor Controller, because I know that you are being asked to do a lot of things, and this kind of was pushed up in the queue. So thank you for recognizing that this is important to this board.
And I think to add to the, we've already done some surveying on the invoices. Anything going through the Auditor Controller or Assured Services, we're making sure that those things are being expedited, and we're averaging roughly 24 business days once the invoice hits the county and once AC issues that payment, and it's through an ACH and not paper. So, but we can definitely work with the other departments to try to, get the entire pool.
But I think the supervisor is talking about, can we move away from a purely cost reimbursement model and expedite our invoice processing in general, so that once we do get invoices that's not based on a cost reimbursement schema, then we can also expedite the processing of the invoice.
And that's really, I don't think, on you per se. I think that's a systemic issue that we need to deal with in the county. Yeah.
All right. With Supervisor Mitchell, I was feeling it over there that you had something else to say.
I'm just looking at the language we just received with regard from you, Madam Chair, and Supervisor Barger, and I, I hope from my comments you understand that I am all about it. I'm with you. My question is just like, who and how fast? That's why I asked the last question of Madam CEO, like what's going to happen next. So if this motion that you brought before us directs CEO Homeless Initiative to report back to the board in writing in 21 days with potential alternative models to fund homeless service providers, and provide a verbal report to the board on recommendations at the June 18th meeting, does that mean that actions can take place faster? Are you asking that they report back to us which model and then we vote and decide on the model, or can they be changing process like today?
Well, I think to your previous question, the urgent payment in that period of time will be dealt with as it's been dealt with in the weeks past. This is structural change, and we need recommendations now.
Got it.
And that needs to come back to this board so we understand what the change is, how it's going to work, what was recommended, and how everybody's going to get on board so we can all be locked arms as you described.
So this is the intermediate going forward.
Yes.
I would just ask maybe once we get this, because again, I don't want to lose sight of this impacts sectors beyond homelessness initiative, contracts across the county land. And so perhaps after this one, we can begin to talk about areas in which we can look at changing our cost reimbursement model for others as well.
And I think it always has been the expectation of the state of emergency for us to be moving faster on this, so we can learn for all of the sectors. But since we are in a state of crisis on this, we need to move fast and making sure that we are finally fixing this, at least as the county partners. We heard from what our partners want from the county, and so what can we as a county do to make that change? And should the federal and other governments want to do that too? It sounds like the federal government is on a different model that maybe works better. So I think we have to do our part, and that's really what this motion is about. With that, I'd love to turn to our executive officer to call the members of the public who have signed up to speak on this item.
Well, Alex Sanchez, Aaliyah,
Speakers in the queue. Your question has been withdrawn. To alert the speaker that you have a question, press 1, then 0. Genevieve, you are in queue. Again. Thank you. Genevieve, are you there? Genevieve? Can we move on to our next speaker, please?
Our next participant is Victor Ramirez. You may begin.
Victor? Victor, are you there? Is it on our side? Are we able to hear our callers? While we're figuring that out, let's go to speakers in person. Moderator, we're going to have staff work with you to figure that out. We'll take our first speaker in person. Go right ahead.
Good morning. My name is Alex Sanchez. I'm the Executive Director of Homeless Unidos. We have a contract with City 1 and City 10 in the city to work with homeless encampments. And one of the things that we found out is that many of our immigrants are not able to receive many of the supportive services. So we encourage the board to also look for means to reduce homelessness for those that are juveniles, that are newly accompanied minors, as well as elderly that are homeless, that are immigrants, and that they don't qualify for those extra services like permanent housing and whatnot, right? I'm also part of IRLA, the Immigrants are LA, so we're definitely pushing on the motion 11 as well. And I want to thank you, Honey Mitchell, for supporting our Central America Youth Leadership Conference that's coming up in May 21st. That's supporting our immigrant youth that are newly arriving to the county. So definitely thank you for your support as well as Hilda Solis.
Thank you. Next speaker.
Hey, I'm Miss Loretta Lorraine. I know you already know me. I'm a big supporter of all of y'all, but also LASHA also helped me to get in the PAT program with Trend Latina. I have had a beautiful experience at the PAT at the loading place over there. I also talked to Miss Mitchell. I've been there a year and going almost a year and something. I'm still waiting on my apartment. I know it's tough nowadays, but I also been waiting. I'm a big supporter. I'm seeing from the inside. I've always spoke from the outside. I didn't know that homelessness was that difficulty, but now I'm seeing it from the inside. I will always fight for the right of the homeless, even when I leave and get the key of my place. And I hope I get my key soon. Miss Hunt and Miss Solis over there, I need your support, girls. But anyway, you know I'm an OG. I keep it real, and God bless you. And I hope that you can help the transgender community because they have helped to help judge it.
Thank you. Absolutely. Next speaker.
Hello, my name is William Melendez.
I'm a peace ambassador at Homies Unidos, and I do personal outreach with homelessness and immigrants. And I personally dealt with those cases, and sometimes they can't get permanent housing because
inside. I will always fight for the right of the homeless, even when I leave and get the key of my place. And I hope I get my key soon. Miss Hunt and Miss Solee over there, I need your support, girls. But anyway, you know I'm an OG. I keep it real, and God bless you. And I hope that you can help the transgender community because they have helped to help you.
Thank you. Absolutely. Next speaker.
Hello, my name is William Melendez. I'm a peace ambassador at Homies Unidos, and I do personal outreach with homelessness and immigrants. And I personally dealt with those cases, and sometimes they can't get permanent housing because they don't have the right resources from LASHA to give them because they're immigrants. They get 6 to 9 months of just housing in what they call timidity. I think it's just not permanent. So I'm here in support, and I'm also part of the ERLA program, and thank you for your time.
Thank you for being here. Next speaker, please.
Good morning, Board of Supervisors. My name is Byron Jose with the Trans-Latino Coalition and Immigrants RLA. Beyond the bureaucracy, and yes, we need to talk about the staff, the personnel that's going to take to execute these services. I mean, the CEO stepped out, so that's unfortunate. But we want to make sure that her office is working with immigrant populations as well as transgender, expansive, and intersex communities who continue to be identified in the reports, in the motion directives, highlighting, prioritizing the needs of immigrants and also transgender, expansive, and intersex communities. So how do we make sure that as we are designing, developing, and spending all this money and all these resources, right, is being channeled and is being set forth for care and services that are informed and culturally competent. Thank you to the board for your leadership and for your support, and thank you for having our public and community members here today.
Thank you. If we could hold applause, if you support, do this. If you are opposed, thumbs down, just so we can keep it moving. Go right ahead.
Hi, my name is Diamond Isabel Cruz, and I am here on behalf of the Transgender Coalition, the Trans-Latina Coalition. I stand here before you today to advocate for an urgent and critical issue that affects marginalized communities within our society. We must address the lack of safe and affordable housing for the Trans-Latina and immigrant individuals as well as trans people upon release from prison. The individuals face unique challenges and vulnerabilities due to intersecting forms of discrimination. Many Trans-Latina, Trans-Latin, and immigrant individuals already marginalized by systematic inequalities find themselves without a stable home upon release from prison. The lack of housing increases the risk of homelessness upon unemployment and engagements in survival activities that perpetuate cycles of harm. It is our responsibility as a compassionate and inclusive society to ensure that everyone has access to safe and stable housing by providing targeted resources, support and...
Thank you very much. Next speaker, please.
Hello, my name is Alia Yousufi. I'm the Senior Policy Coordinator for the Council on American Islamic Relations. Kara is also a co-chair for the Immigrants RLA campaign. I wanted to thank the supervisors for providing this elaborate discussion about LASHA and some of the difficulties that it's facing, but I also want to bring up the issue that as in addition to being a pass-through funding agency, it also needs to provide better oversight of the service providers, and that includes making sure that all the programs that it oversees are adequately accessible to the immigrant communities within LA County. And I know that ERLA and LASHA staff have been in conversation about how we can better the way that these programs are implemented so that no one is left out, but it's still a work in progress. And so we are urging you to keep up the pressure to make sure that no one is excluded as we continue to improve our systems. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker.
Good afternoon. My name is Luna de la Morte, here speaking in support of Trans-Latina Coalition. I'm currently housed at Trans-Latina Coalition, their Hope House. So I just want to thank you all for speaking in support of the systems and the programs that are keeping me alive right now. So it's just been a massive help since I started there. I've been in LA for a week. I left an abusive relationship that I needed to get out of to be safe, and they're helping me get work. They're helping me build my resume. They got me clothes. They got me a safe place to live. And without their help, I probably wouldn't be here. I'd be in a hospital crying somewhere. So without their help, my you know, my life would just be very, very horrible right now. So I can't thank them enough for the help that they've given me, and I thank you as well for supporting that and supporting people like me who really need this help. Also, I'm getting services with LASHA, so great services that are saving my life right now. So please keep these. Thank you.
Thank you.
Again for your support.
Thank you very much. Next speaker, please.
Hello, good morning, our beloved Board of Supervisors. My name is Aurea Recinto, and I am calling in support of the Immigrants, our Los Angeles Coalition, and item 27, the motion supporting the housing for immigrants of Los Angeles County. I represent Filipino Worker Center under domestic workers, and I work in District 26. I'm calling your support in housing upon the reduction of rent mobilization cap from 5 to 3%. We will continue to amplify the need to reduce the cap as a policy request, amplifying stories of people who have received increases above 5% because of loopholes. Everyone needs housing. Immigrants cannot be excluded from LA County Housing Program because of their status. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker.
Good afternoon, Board of Supervisors. My name is Melissa Cepeda, and I am here today on behalf of COFEM, the Council of Mexican Federations, and the ITLA Coalition. As a resident and worker of District 4, I asked the Board of Supervisors to ensure a reduction of rent stabilization cap from 5 to 3%. We'll continue to amplify the need to reduce the cap as a policy request, amplifying stories of people who have received increases above 5% because of these loopholes. As ARP funding comes to an end, renters throughout this region face the end of rent protections. We'll continue to lift the need to include everyone in extending these subsidy programs. Housing is a necessity. Everyone needs housing. Immigrants cannot be excluded from LA County housing programs because of their legal status. As constituents, they deserve this inclusion. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Next speaker.
The Red Chief Hunt. First of all, I like to say, if it was easy, everybody would be doing it. Number two is we know the statistics, but we don't know the logistics. This is our stumbling point. Number three, if we can move 100,000 troops overseas in 3 weeks ready for war, and we can't move 120,000 people into housing in the city and the county of Los Angeles, that's a big problem. Here's what the whole big deal is. I've been through 3-4 programs, is that we have to claim eminent domain on 1/3 of all properties now, and we have to have the president do that for fair market rating so we can get these people into housing and things like that. And then we have to put a dime tax on all cigarette and alcohol beverages so that the city and the county can split the $4.2 billion every year so we can get the job done. It doesn't take a rocket scientist, but if we don't head in that direction, then we're going to be lost without red.
Thank you. Next speaker.
Buenos días. Mi nombre es Oscar Iraeta, soy miembro y parte de la organización Salva y parte de la organización IRLA.
Good morning. My name is Oscar Iraeta, and I am a member and leader of the organization Salva, and also a member of the organization IRLA.
Vivo y trabajo en el distrito 5 de nuestra supervisora Catherine Vargas.
I live and work in District 5, Supervisor Catherine Barger.
Y estoy aquí porque también queremos pedirles que en nuestro presupuesto sea incluido siempre la vivienda y el acceso lingüístico.
And I'm here to ask that in the budget we would always have included housing and also language access.
El día de ayer recibíamos un caso en nuestra organización.
We received a case in our organization yesterday
donde una estudiante
in which there was a female student
está sufriendo violencia doméstica
and she's suffering from domestic violence.
y no tenemos la capacidad de tener casas de transición para ayudar a una mujer latina.
We don't have the capacity to have transitional housing to be able to help Latina women.
Tuvimos otro caso de otro miembro de nuestra organización
And there was another case of one of our members from our organization
donde no se le dio el acceso a salud mental por falta de documentos en este país.
in which that person was not provided with mental health services because of not having papers in this country.
Y esto es justo porque vivimos y pagamos impuestos donde la humanidad tiene que ser primero.
And this is just because we live in a place where we pay taxes and humanity needs to come first.
Estas son las peticiones y prioridades que nosotros como IRLA y como organización Salva estamos pidiéndoles a ustedes como supervisores que puedan dar su voto.
These are the asks, these are the priorities that we are asking as IRLA and Salva, that we are asking you as supervisors to have your vote.
Thank you. Thank you. Next speaker. Next speaker, please.
Good afternoon. Good morning. Oh, good afternoon. My name is Maria Elena Meraz. I'm Parent Engagement Academy CEO. I've been working with parents and family for the last 29 years of my life. And I'm here to ask the Board of Supervisors to consider...
Okay, Supervisor Barker said it's not about the money. Then she starts talking about the money. It is the effective use of money. Billions of dollars are the new vernacular, not the millions. Go to the people for the money immediately. All homeless are not the same and cut from the same cloth as RECC has asked Ryan Serrano to give a designated list of those. The transient campsites are essential to the solution. Man is a pleasure-paying animal. Arrest and confine for defecating on our sidewalks is essential. And Sheriff Arpaio type confinement. Roland Heights has been abused by the county's negligence, i.e. Stater Brothers, Jack in the Box, and the tunnel dwellers. You can see it all on my YouTube channel. Time out.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Our next participant is Eric Preven. You may begin.
Thank you. My heart goes out to the county and the supervisors in LASHA. This is not going to be popular, but I think it's probably time to disband it. It's not working very well, and I think too many good people are being chewed up by it and will be chewed up by it. So I'm wondering if we can find a way. I know like some of the people who are more finger-pointing oriented at the city have been saying this, but I think we can lock arms and disband it. It's too big and cumbersome. It was an interesting idea. It doesn't work. It's like CES, you know, how much money and energy and money, and then it becomes a question of, wait, is it incompetence? Could it possibly, I know Supervisor Mitchell said, obviously it's not misappropriation, but you know, misapplication of funds and failure to get it out the door and all this over and over again starts to become really a question of accountability for the taxpayers, and we are not at all happy. I mean, you know, nice job scheduling a 4-hour meeting before public comment. You know how hard it was to stay in the meeting after
Thank you. Your time is
Oh my God.
extended. May we have the next speaker, please?
Our next participant is Genevive Claverelle. You may begin.
Yes, good afternoon. I am glad to see the Board of Supervisors taking very seriously what's going on homeless. I don't think it's misappropriation of funds, but I think it's poor management. And I really want to ask them to look at that in detail. And maybe they need some support, some consulting, but things are not moving in the right direction. So thank you for looking at it. Thank you. Have a good day.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Our next participant is Victor Ramirez. You may begin.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Go ahead.
Good afternoon. My name is Hector Ramirez. I'm a person with a disability in Chatsworth. I really want to thank the Board of Supervisors for this particular presentation. And as the previous speaker, I definitely think it's a really good initial step. As a person with a disability, and really interesting to see.
Supervising parking control officer will function as our liaison to the community and attend community meetings along with station personnel. Residents and stakeholders' concerns are expressed to the supervising parking control officers, who then address them accordingly. Recognizing the environmental impact, we have deployed our resources by assessing nuisance areas and conducted parking violation saturations where appropriate. These saturations have removed many abandoned and inoperable vehicles that inhibit residents' legal parking. These slides, or I'm sorry, we're not showing slides. Our parking enforcement detail has done so much to improve these areas that were discussed in the October board meeting. As I stated in March, we have improved and enhanced our online Contact Us parking enforcement portal via the Sheriff's Department LASD.org website. That will also have a customer satisfaction survey featuring that has been created. The Sheriff's Department can provide a monthly revenue tracking report illustrating the increased citations due to additional staff and coverage. The Sheriff's Department has implemented a tracking system for performance metrics and response times for calls for service, citizen phone calls, and email requests. The Sheriff's Department can track and provide monthly reports to ascertain violation compliance, and to track high violation areas for the board as requested. To further meet citizen needs and the goals of our board, this business plan we provided would expand the parking enforcement detail in 2 phases. The plan will increase our personnel and the overall footprint within the county. It includes adding additional administrative support positions. The expansion will allow us to meet county needs, which include proactive parking enforcement 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, to properly enforce street sweeping routes, enforce posted parking restrictions, for example, overnight parking, address routine parking issues such as fire hydrants, blocked driveways, and double parking, attend to quality of life issues like abandoned, stolen, and inoperable vehicles, address more individual parking issues identified by our community members. Under the parking enforcement detail's current personnel model, we do not have the necessary resources to serve the community properly. I want to make it clear this was not due to the work of our amazing parking control officers. They were actually doing their job and doing a good job at it. We have an amazing team, and these employees truly care about their job, their community, and being part of the Sheriff's Department. This is strictly due to the program not growing with the needs of our county. So the county grew way ahead. We all know about housing challenges, parking challenges, and we just didn't grow with it. Our plan utilizes the department's existing infrastructure and personnel to carry out the current and expanded services in a fiscally advantageous manner for the county. If fully approved, we are confident that the Sheriff's Department will meet the Board of Supervisors' vision for parking enforcement and the community's needs. We look forward to working with the board, local stakeholders, and our community. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Supervisor Hahn?
Thank you, Chair Horvath, and thank you, Chair, for the presentation on what you envision parking enforcement to be like to better serve the constituents that we all represent in unincorporated communities. I know you've heard the frustration from my colleagues over what I think was generally viewed as inadequate and unequal enforcement. So I think this plan really shows that you're taking our concerns seriously, and your proposal is attempting to do it better. I think there's a lot of strengths in your proposal. I appreciate that includes community outreach and engagement, because I know it's been brought up in the past that we're, not going to be able to cite our way out of a lot of these parking issues in unincorporated county. Some of them stem from more complex issues like the cost of housing, lack of available parking, multiple generations living together in one home. So I think engaging with the community and understanding what is at the heart of a lot of these parking issues is really important as we move forward. I also really appreciate that your plan includes a plan to purchase electric vehicles. I know that's going to be a little more expensive, and it is a cost, but I think that really falls in line with the county's goal to move towards clean air vehicles, particularly, I think, in and around our more dense neighborhoods and communities that have, historically borne the brunt of air pollution and, other toxic things in their environment. And I'm really supportive of that. I hope we can figure out how to make that happen in our budget. Again, I know that's an expense. So, Sheriff, I have a few questions. So in your business plan, you indicate the need for 57 new budgeted positions. We all hear, I heard you speak about it at Contract Cities, is it's difficult. There's a staffing shortage. It's difficult to recruit law enforcement positions in general. How do you plan to expand your parking enforcement unit, since seems like there's a lot of people that you would need to hire to realize this vision, or do you have another plan to fill those positions?
When you heard me speak this weekend at Contract Services, I was primarily talking about sworn staffing. That's where our biggest vacancies are. We do have vacancies among our professional staff, but I really got to compliment our personnel and the two ladies sitting on either side of me, because even as we talked through some of the challenges that were brought forward, they went out and recruited and hired another 10 to fill some of those vacancies. We are confident that using the same strategies of going out, we have 10 others in backgrounds, and we will continue to do that if that gets approved down the road. But the fact that that this was brought to light encouraged us to focus more on this area, put more attention on this area, and you see the results. And there's some pretty immediate results based on the last time we spoke about this to today's current date.
Thank you. And I know we see the blue shirt workers here today. We know they have been such an integral part of parking enforcement and have made it very clear that they want to have parking enforcement stay in the sheriff's department for a variety of reasons. But it also came out in some of our discussion that there was kind of an unequal view of parking enforcement, or an unequal engagement with parking enforcement folks and the community. For instance, in my unincorporated communities, they had a really good working relationship with parking enforcement. Parking enforcement seemed to show up at community meetings and town halls. People talked about having cell phone numbers of parking enforcement to engage in a very positive relationship. But listening to some of my colleagues, didn't seem like that was across the board the experience that other communities were having. How do you plan to replicate the experience that I think some of my unincorporated communities have with parking enforcement, so that is, county-wide?
Yeah, the fact that this was brought to our attention in the manner that it was, I don't think for us as a department, we were aware of some of the challenges that each and every one of you were facing. So I appreciate the fact that it was brought forward. As you see throughout this business plan, and even as we just initiated and started to hire more people, it's not just about one of our employees going out, responding to or initiating a violation. It's just as important to participate in community engagement, whether it's a community forum or meeting, to listen to our community members, to hear what they're experiencing, times of the day, locations, and as we enhance that, and if you see in some of the positions that we're looking at, we included supervisory positions in here, all professional staff members not sworn, where their sole responsibilities would be to do that, to engage our community, to make sure that we're exchanging information, and not only in person, but now figuring out a more advanced way of doing it electronically.
So also in your report, I was reading that you've created a customer satisfaction survey. Didn't know if that was been created, has it been rolled out? And I'm curious to know what your goal is of that customer satisfaction survey. I mean, it's kind of like, did we put the ticket on your windshield in a friendly way? Did we tow your car and leave you a pleasant note? What exactly are you looking for in customer satisfaction?
Yeah, so those can be people that live in the area that have complaints, not the person getting the ticket as well as the person getting the ticket. And then one other item that you talked about previously, the supervising parking control officers, those people will be the liaisons with the community. And they also set up a Teams group site, which has your board offices on it as well as DPW. So we have real-time information sharing. When the complaints come into you guys, you can share that with us and it can be addressed immediately.
Okay, thank you. And then one question for Fiza, and then I've got one last question for the sheriff. So, Fiza, there's two plans before us, right? One we heard from Department of Public Works, which is why I thought it would be valuable to have the sheriff come in and present their plan so we actually could compare side by side. They have different price tags. The sheriff's price tag is lower than the one we saw from Public Works. And my previous motion asked for you to review the proposals and then provide your recommendation as our county CEO. When do you think we will see that recommendation?
So thank you, Supervisor. So I believe the motion asked me to come back during one of the budget phases. So I think it's final changes budget phases. We will, of course, we have some questions. So we will, of course, work with the Sheriff's Department, and I'm sure we'll have some additional questions from Public Works, so we can do an apples to apples comparison, but it's final changes.
Okay, and then, and again, I will say, I think this has been really eye-opening. I appreciate Supervisor Mitchell, really, I mean, it was almost like, it was a 3-alarm fire, really, when you brought it forward. It really was, and I feel like you've certainly gotten the attention of the sheriff, and I think you've gotten the attention of all of us in terms of what a critical service parking enforcement is, and how it's delivered, and how it's perceived in our communities is really goes to the heart of really a service delivery. So appreciate this. I always feel like it should stay here, but it needed a lot of improvement, and I think we're hearing that you're getting that. So one last time, Sheriff, we heard from the employees. Why do you think it's best that parking enforcement stay in the Sheriff's Department as opposed to going to Public Works?
From a safety aspect, from an operational aspect, logistical, radio communications, it's working out well. Obviously, we've seen the fact that there's some improvements that we can make from a customer service perspective, and we're in the middle of that. But this weekend, we had one of our parking enforcement officers assaulted. And somebody was very unhappy that their vehicle was being towed, and they came out swinging. The officer responded appropriately from what we can see preliminarily, had to utilize pepper spray to defend themselves, but immediately was able to get on his radio with direct dispatch to the station, and immediately was assisted by sworn sheriff deputies who ended up arresting the individual without incident. And I think that story says a lot about putting our employees out there in the best situation, better equipped, better trained, and directly in communication with sheriff deputies who can assist them within minutes when something goes wrong. And I say when, not if, but when something goes wrong. I think that right there just says it all.
Thank you, Sheriff. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Supervisor Mitchell.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Supervisor Hahn. Just wanted to just make sure that our record is absolutely clear. I appreciate your motion in April that required that the sheriff come back with a report. I believe it was a Mitchell motion that said the CEO would make the decision about whether it would be housed in Public Works or the Sheriff's Department. So I appreciate you bringing that forward. Say it again?
You can have credit for that.
Okay, thank you. I'll take it. And I really appreciate you, Sheriff, truly, and your team for responding so quickly to the challenges my constituents had been living within. You know, it was a surprise to me to hear that it wasn't the experience countywide, that there were communities that had a very different experience, and that made it all the more painful for me to know that there were communities who were not. So I appreciate you all leaning in, and I'm sure your personnel who you have fought for appreciate 22 new colleagues coming on board. So the speed with which you have taken action is to be acknowledged and commended. You know, we just spent several hours talking about an issue external when service demands don't meet delivery. And I talked about then that we have the same responsibility that we're expecting of outside service providers. We have the same responsibility internally to make sure that our delivery of services meets the demand and expectations of our county residents, particularly equally applied across the county. And so that has always been my motivation, to make sure that service is meeting the demand of the people who elect me to be their voice on this body. And so, again, we had early conversations. We put forward a motion which clearly triggered amazing response, and I appreciate you for stepping up and prioritizing this group of employees and this kind of service for constituents. Couple of questions I have, because I think it's really going to be important that we are looking at a true kind of apples to apples comparison to the report already provided by Public Works. So I have a couple questions from the slides that we had access to. In the report, you highlight a goal of 24/7 coverage with the addition of early morning shifts, and early morning shifts have already started Monday through Thursday. So my question is, do you intend to expand those through the weekend? Because that's really when we see the influx of parking violations. So the question is, will it include weekends? Because it wasn't clear to us in the report that it has or will.
Yes, ma'am, it will, and we can provide you with at least the schedules of how we've broken down, which shows full coverage, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and that's with relief. So, you know, when an employee is off, there will still be somebody there.
Excellent. The org chart in the report, it appears that, you know, historically it was sworn personnel that provided supervisorial responsibilities, and it appears in the org chart that that's no longer going to be the case. That the requested administrative positions for phase 1 would provide that kind of oversight. So I wanted to confirm that that's true, that no longer sworn personnel, because that has real direct impact on costs, and would have been the case in a Public Works model. So sworn personnel will no longer provide.
With direct supervision, it is professional staff supervision that will be overseeing this group. At the very high rank, you still have a captain up there, but it's only a portion of it. But the majority of the supervision, almost all of the supervision and management, will be done by professional staff.
Which creates promotional opportunities for your staff that didn't exist before, because it was sworn personnel that provided that supervision.
That's true. It does.
Great. Okay, I just wanted to clarify that because I wasn't clear. With regard to the vehicles, I agree with my colleague. It's, you know, represent this board on AQMD. We're, it's great about making that